The boy thought he knew that risking one's life was an extremely difficult thing to do. Whether it was work, sports, hobbies, or gambling, in 2034 Japan, it was difficult to abandon everything in pursuit of something. The MC had not attended school enough, nor had he worked enough even as an adult. He had literally risked everything, devoting himself entirely to his goal except for the bare necessities of food, sleep, and excretion. He was simply dead set on reaching the very top, the absolutely flawless first-place rank recognized by everyone in the world, an existence revered by everyone practically as if he were a god. He was the strongest ruler in history, one who had never tolerated even a single defeat. That was him, the MC, undisputedly him. The MC was the world rank first in the fully immersive Vermorp called Mobius Online by a wide margin. His achievements in life, everything he had in life, all of it became history that day. The other day, his main character, named Seven, had been hacked and deleted. It was not only his own offline data, but everything ranging from backups and so on, and he was not the only one harmed. There were 3,000 players, all of them high-ranking players. The MC heard that the culprit was one of those high-ranking players and had carelessly resorted to crime out of envy. Yet there was no way the culprit could have carelessly carried out something like hacking the character data of 3,000 players. It was a deed done out of aberrant determination. Afterward, the Mobius Online admins announced that they were unable to restore any of the affected characters. The only compensation they could offer was a special promotion on charges and so on when creating a new character. Upon reading the announcement, the MC threw off his VR in anger and shouted a curse. No matter how many times people inquired or raided their head office, the admins gave the same response. After letting out his frustrations, the MC slumped on his bed, thinking that he could not find the will to do anything. Nothing came to mind. All he could do was sigh. He would never get his first-place status back again. The MC sat up and told himself that he could not remain in distress forever. A wide grin crept onto his lips. He decided that, all right then, he would simply die. To his surprise, however, when he opened his eyes, he found himself in a strange world. As he looked around, the place slowly became familiar. It was Mobius Online. At the same time, he wondered when he had logged in. Just then, a girl angrily called out to him for blocking the way and zoning out in front of her store. When the MC faced her, he recognized her as Icicle's poster girl, Isejon. He was used to hearing her voice, but he had never heard her speak in such a manner before. The MC wondered whether some update had been implemented while he was unaware. Meanwhile, Ice's cheeks quickly turned red as she stared at his face. Stammering, she apologized and asked whether he had some business with her store. The MC was confused by how she had suddenly become gentle and was even blushing. Without a second thought, he called her cute, thinking that it would not be an exaggeration to say that this was a godly update. At his remark, Ice's face turned crimson red. With a shaky voice, she reacted in embarrassment before entering her store. The MC watched her from outside and thought that what she had done earlier was magnificent behavior. Chances were that some sort of rapport system had been implemented during the time he had not been logged in. Then, when he saw his reflection, the MC was surprised. It was not the same character after all. It was not Seven. It was Second. Second was an alt character he had made at the same time as his main character, Seven. He still had not trained it in any way. It was simply a mule character with 0 XP. The MC, now in Second's body, let out a deep sigh and concluded that it was hopeless. He could no longer find the will to play Mob Ion all over again and decided that he would simply log out as quickly as possible. However, when he tried, he could not log out. More precisely, he could not even open the settings screen. Second wondered whether the game had bugged out. For the time being, he considered pressing the emergency stop button to return to reality. Slowly, the truth dawned on him. A smirk formed on his lips. There was no reality anymore. He had already died, so why had he forgotten? Yet one puzzling thought remained. If he was dead, why was he inside Mob Ion? He wondered whether his world in the afterlife was Mobius Online. No, he was certain that he had wished from the bottom of his heart that it would have been wonderful if he could have been born into the world of Mob Ion. If it had been possible, he would have preferred being born into a game's world. Even if he said so himself, those had been rather pathetic last words. Second wondered whether they might have actually come true. He quickly pinched himself, and the sharp pain made him gasp. Shocked, he realized that it hurt even though this was supposed to be a game. If Isejon's un-NPC-like remarks and the reason he could not log out were the same phenomenon, then he could accept it. But if that was true, then he had been reborn in a game world. Tears burst into his eyes with joy. He repeatedly cried out that this was the best and expressed his gratitude. Forgetting himself entirely, Second danced around like a madman for almost an hour, making strange noises. Compared to the happiest moment of his life, when Second had seized first place in the world, he was now several dozen, several hundred and several thousand times happier. Just then, a guard grabbed him and held him down, placing him under arrest. The guard turned to Ice and asked whether she was certain that he was the right person. Ice confirmed that Second had been causing a ruckus in front of the store and asked the guard to take him away. Second broke into a cold sweat. Moments later, Second was at the 3rd Chivalric Order station. A woman interrogated him about why he had done something like that, and Second explained that he had simply gotten a little excited. The people in front of him were members of the 3rd Chivalric Order of the Kingdom of Castal. In layman's terms, they were the police, and Second was being questioned at their Chivalric Order station. The woman examined him and, judging from his appearance, wondered whether he was a noble, what family he belonged to, why he was alone, and what had happened to his companion. Second replied that he was not a noble. He secretly glanced at her, thinking that she looked like a lovely, dignified female knight. She was not merely cute but beautiful as well. However, he had never seen an NPC like her before, which made him wonder whether she was exclusive to this world. The female knight glared at him before slamming her hands onto the table. She made it clear that noble rights held no weight before the 3rd Chivalric Order, and that anyone who violated the law was a criminal. Crimes were evil, and evil would be judged. Protecting good citizens was their duty, and that was justice. She demanded that the corrupt noble confess, having already obtained significant evidence. Second calmly maintained that this was precisely why he was saying that he was not a noble. However, his words were immediately cut off. Second realized that there was no point in continuing because the girl could not be reasoned with. The female knight suddenly calmed down and concluded that he was refusing to answer. She then decided that she had no choice but to take further action. Gripping the hilt of her sword threateningly, she prepared to draw it at any moment. Seeing this, Second grew nervous and quickly asked her to wait, indicating that he would talk. The female knight lowered her hand and remarked that he could have done so from the beginning. She then demanded his name and occupation. Second gave his name as Second and stated that he was an adventurer. However, the female knight immediately accused him of lying. Second was troubled and wondered what he should do. The female knight narrowed her eyes at him before pointing out that his outfit was tailored too well to possibly belong to an adventurer. It looked fairly expensive. Hearing that, Second finally understood that his equipment was the culprit. It was not as flashy as his main characters, but he had put rare clothes on Second so the character would look nice. That was why he was being mistaken for a noble. It was seriously bad news. The friction between the lower divisions of the 3rd Chivalric Order and the nobles was a well-known story. This female knight had been piling up grudges under the upper divisions, who had been deeply colluding with the nobles. She was essentially a constable overflowing with a sense of justice, and judging from her appearance, her sense of justice was clearly greater than that of the average person. Second realized that this was bad. He had nothing to prove his status, and had no idea what he should do. The female knight demanded that he confess what he was scheming. Her words were cut off when a man entered the room. Without warning, he lightly bonked his fist against her head and reprimanded her for being a bloody dimwit. The man glanced at Second and acknowledged that his subordinate had been impolite. He would take over the questioning instead. Second nodded in response. The man apologized to him and explained that they suspected Second might be deliberately obstructing business, so he would have to answer some questions. First, Second needed to briefly explain his social status and intentions. Second gave his name and stated that he was 17 years old and an adventurer. Inwardly, however, he knew that his actual name was Satsuo Shikaru, that he was 28 years old, single, and unemployed. He had entered 17 years of age as this character's status, so he answered with that instead. The man acknowledged his answer and explained that witnesses had reported seeing Second dancing and making strange sounds in front of a grocery store. He wanted to know why Second had been doing such a thing. Second explained that he had unintentionally zoned out and apologized. The man took this as a confession and then asked about his intentions. Second explained that he had not planned to cause trouble for the store and did not have any particular intentions at the moment. Inwardly, he found the situation insanely pathetic. Somehow, this place had made him fully realize that he was now in a proper society. The man sighed and confirmed that Second was claiming he had not deliberately obstructed business. Second affirmed that he had not. Afterward, Second compensated the grocery store ICC and was released. He wondered whether this society could really function like that. ICC's compensation had been only 150,000 CL. That amount of money could not even sufficiently afford armor at a tier where he would not look like a noob wearing it. At present, Second had a little over 2 billion CL. Without wasting a moment, he had immediately changed into attractive rare clothes, which had incidentally been mistaken for a noble's clothing. He also had adequate full-body armor that he had bought. The total cost was 2,300,000 CL. Whether that was considered high or low remained a mystery to him. Somehow, the prices of things seemed different from the Mabayon he knew. That meant he needed to investigate the value of currency in this world as quickly as possible. Just then, his stomach growled loudly. The timing was perfect. He would have a meal, which would also make it convenient and easy to determine the value of money by checking the price of something like a meal with a night's stay. Second spotted an establishment nearby and decided that it should be fine. He believed there was a bar on the first floor. He immediately entered, and a young lady stepped forward to welcome him. Second asked about the price for a night. The lady did not respond at first and simply stared at him. After a brief pause, Second asked again. She suddenly snapped out of it and stammered an apology before confirming that he was asking about the price for a night, fumbling over her words. In the back of his mind, Second felt that he had received the same sort of reaction when he first met Isejon. The receptionist girl was acting fairly suspicious. At last, she regained her composure and explained that it would cost 7,000 CL per night, including breakfast and dinner, while a stay without meals would cost 4,000 CL. Second was surprised by how cheap it sounded. Then it hit him that the full body armor he had bought must actually have been insanely high class. He decided to stay for 5 nights without meals. The girl quickly accepted and handed him the key. As their hands brushed, she froze, and her face instantly turned bright red. Second blinked, puzzled by her reaction, and wondered about the strange feeling he was getting. Shortly afterward, he headed to a pub. Sitting alone, he casually scanned the room and noticed several girls secretly glancing in his direction. Then it finally clicked. He understood that he completely stuck out like a sore thumb because of his appearance, especially to these girls with their passionate gazes. His avatar was the reason. This was the result of setting up a limited-time premium avatar to be exceptionally beautiful. Even if an ordinary character was beautiful in an online game, nobody would look at the player, but it was an entirely different story when that character became a real person in a real world. Inwardly, Second smugly realized that in this body, he was beginning to fully grasp the reality that this place was no longer the inside of an online game. A shiver ran along his spine, and a pleasant feeling passed through him as a smile unintentionally escaped his lips. His efforts here would not be futile in any way, not in this supreme world where he believed that nothing lay beyond. The words thrown at him before he was reincarnated echoed in his mind. Even if he tried his best at an online game, it was completely pointless. Another voice had told him to hurry and return to reality. Someone else had insisted that it was useless even if he became number 1 in the world in a game. Others had told him to attend school diligently, work seriously, and think about what he was planning to do from then on. But in this world, the reasonable arguments he had repeatedly been given and the dissatisfaction buried in the very depths of his heart were all nullified. A small laugh escaped his lips, and soon he found himself laughing openly. Second lifted his head, his eyes filled with resolve. He had decided to become number 1 in the world again. The next morning, Second woke up groaning in pain. He had gotten too carried away the previous night, and guzzling down alcohol he was not used to had been a bad idea, even if it had been for the just cause of celebrating his reincarnation into a parallel world. He was even suffering from a hangover. Second stood up and considered that, since this place was no longer the inside of a game but reality to him, there were many skills in Mabayon that were considered necessary. It was out of the question for him not to acquire them. The nature of the game in Mabayon was primarily built around an experience point system. He needed experience to learn skills and raise his stats, which meant earning experience came first. Acquiring experience was simple. He only needed to either defeat monsters or accomplish quests. The skills covered an enormous variety of fighting techniques, magical powers, and craft. Each skill had established rankings, from the 16th class to the 1st class, followed by the 1st grade to the 9th grade. There was also a special rank known as the title. Moreover, experience points were required to raise a skills rank. The way stats increased also differed according to the growth type selected when creating a character. Of course, a tremendous amount of experience was needed to increase stats as well. Shortly afterward, Second went to the bar on the 1st floor and ordered a serving of curry rice from a nearby waitress. The lady welcomed him warmly. Unaware of the constant glances being directed his way, Second sank into deep thought. That reminded him. He had known it. The growth type of the character named Second was the same as that of his character 7, an all-rounder type. When acquiring experience as an all-rounder, his stats grew equally without any deviation. The good news was that this type was suited for becoming number 1 in the world, but the bad news was that it was a jack of all trades and master of none. Just then, the waitress returned with his order and apologized for keeping him waiting. Unlike a specialized type, whose stats could end up stretching oddly, an all-rounder could flawlessly raise all of his stats at once. It could be considered overwhelmingly advantageous to be an all-rounder type. In exchange, however, the initial development was considerably more intense than that of the other growth type. If that was the case, Second had no choice but to use it. That method. After breakfast, Second went to the potion specialty store and requested as many bottles as they had of the Detoxify, Dispel, and Recovery High potions. The staff were left speechless. The old man eventually found his voice and warned that, including the ones in storage, the purchase would amount to an astonishing sum of money. Ignoring the warning, Second asked how many they had. The old man explained that they currently had almost 630. Second decided to take all of them. The two staff members were shocked because the potions Second had purchased were high potions strengthened by 2 steps, with detoxifying, dispelling, and recovery effects. Each one cost 120,000 CL. At 120,000 CL multiplied by 630 bottles, the total would be 600 million thousand CL. After regaining their composure, the man immediately brought the potions and apologized for keeping Second waiting. Second decided to buy all of the potions at once with cash and cram them into his inventory. Before leaving, he also requested nearly 9,000 more bottles and asked the staff to restock them for him. The two staff members were left standing there with their jaws wide open once again. The reason Second needed all of these high-class potions was a tactic formerly known as the DK tactic in Mabayon. It was a cheat-tier method of earning starting experience that had originated in an old 8-bit game called Dinosaur Quest. The method involved throwing fixed damage items at enemies with high evasion in order to defeat them. Second had thought of using this method to earn experience. The truth was that these potions, which possessed detoxifying, dispelling, and recovery effects, could also deal fixed damage to undead enemies. The Detoxify, Dispel, Recover High Potion Plus that he had bought that day each dealt a fixed 1,200 damage to undead enemies. That amount of damage was just enough to whittle away the HP of an intermediate-level monster called the Viper Zombie, which possessed a relatively generous amount of experience even among undead enemies. In other words, by throwing these potions at Viper Zombies, anyone could annihilate them, even a beginner or a 3-year-old child. However, this method was only used by alts belonging to some high-class players because it required an insane amount of money. To earn a sufficient amount of experience, at least 10,000 of these potions were needed, totaling 1.2 billion CL. The only people capable of preparing that kind of money without batting an eye were, as expected, those who had a main character on the side. Therefore, the DK tactic was an exceedingly superior way of earning experience in the beginning, but it was strictly useful only at the start. Once a player became an intermediate player, the method was no longer viable. Second went to the stables to purchase a horse. He chose the black horse and decided to name it the 7th Taio starting that day. Second smirked at the thought that the day had come when he would have to resort to this. With that, Second began his journey. He eventually stopped at a cave. While walking inside, he noted that he had already put nearly 2 hours of horseback distance between himself and the royal capital. He believed there was a well-known hunting ground inside a large cave behind the mine, but there was not a single soul there. Perhaps the DK tactic had not been discovered in this world yet. Perhaps the potions were simply too expensive, so nobody used it. Or perhaps there were not that many beginners. Whatever the reason, it was not exactly a mystery to Second. The absence of anyone else meant that he could hunt all he wanted. After looking around for a few moments, Second finally found what he was looking for. Sensing his presence, the Viper Zombie turned toward him. Second immediately shuddered in disgust. In the end, they looked 100 times more disgusting than they did inside a game. Without wasting a moment, Second forced himself to get the task done quickly so he could head back. He hid behind a rock and carefully peeked at the monster. After spotting it, he began throwing potions one after another. Each bottle shattered on impact, and the Viper Zombie was instantly defeated. Second's face lit up with delight. Somehow, it felt good. After purging it, Second moved on to the next hunting ground and repeated the process indefinitely. By the time he returned to the first hunting ground, the Viper Zombie had spawned again, allowing him to purge it once more. Without taking a single break, Second continued throwing potions at the monsters non-stop until all 630 bottles had finally been used. The amount of experience he had gained was fairly passable. If he kept this up, Second would soon have gathered almost all of the necessary skills and would also be able to raise his skill rank. Having lost track of time, Second continued. Second cursed under his breath, realizing that the sun had probably already set. He decided to return. Riding back the way he had come, he eventually halted when he reached the royal capital. He planned to eat a meal, get drunk, take a bath, and then sleep. Just then, a familiar woman called out to him, asking who he was. Second immediately sensed that something bad was about to happen. He was fairly certain it was that dense yet beautiful female knight named Sylvia, or something like that. Second hopped off his horse and thanked her for the previous day. Sylvia replied grumpily, recognizing him as the second punk from yesterday and questioning what he was doing out so late at night. Second stared at her doubtful eyes and realized that he was being questioned. He explained that he had been at the mines for a while. Sylvia repeated that he had been at the mines and questioned what he had gone there for. Second explained that he had gone to earn experience at the large cave behind the mines. Sylvia narrowed her gaze, clearly unconvinced, and told him that he should at least make his lies realistic. She could not understand why he would deliberately go to such a dangerous place simply to defeat monsters. Hearing that, Second furrowed his brow and asked what she meant. He added that he had simply thought the viper zombies there were rather delicious. Sylvia responded flatly and concluded that he apparently had no common sense, or perhaps that Second had a screw loose in his brain. Second could not help thinking that the girl was irritating. Then it hit him. Had she just said that the place was dangerous? Second asked Sylvia whether he could ask her a question. After receiving her approval, he asked about the number of dungeons. In his thoughts, he recalled the dungeons of Mabayon, which could be considered paradises. There were 21 of them in total. Players all attempted to raid them together, pooling their intel, while each one sought ways to explore them easily. Sylvia, however, was puzzled by what he was talking about. There were 19 dungeons, not 21. Second immediately understood what that meant. He asked how many of those dungeons were currently being raided. Sylvia gave him a puzzled look before answering that 13 were obviously being raided. Second silently realized that this could not be true. Shrugging it off, Second indicated that he understood. He thanked Sylvia and asked whether he could leave. Sylvia told him to hurry off. Without another word, Second continued on his way. He had more or less understood the situation now. In this world, people died when they were killed. In other words, there were not many people desperate enough to put even their lives on the line just to become stronger. Somehow, everything was over once they died. A smile spread across Second's lips. He already possessed all the intel that players in Mabayon would have had to risk their lives thousands to tens of thousands of times to acquire. Second smirked. He might be able to reach number 1 in the world earlier than he had expected. The next morning, Second began his journey again. He thought that once they had earned a certain amount of experience, their next destination would be this place, the Grand Royal Library. The reason for coming to the library was related to the skill acquisition system in Mabayon. In Mabayon, there were primarily 2 conditions for acquiring skills. The first was reading skill books, and the Grand Royal Library contained multitudes of them. A librarian politely asked Second what he was looking for. His eyes fell on her chest, but he quickly indicated that he was fine. The librarian then left. Second scanned the surrounding bookshelves. Although the requirement stated that he had to read the books, simply flipping through their pages would fulfill the condition. With that in mind, he began moving through the bookshelves at a reasonably quick pace. Before long, Second found the books he was searching for. This time, he intended to learn 2 fundamental skills for both the swordsmanship and archery arts, along with the 4 different elements for the skill called the Ichi no Kata, or Opyo form, in sorcery. There were many kinds of skills besides swordsmanship and archery, including spearmanship, unarmed combat, and shieldmanship. Each of these combat-type major skills had 9 kinds of minor skills: pawn, spear, knight, silver general, gold general, bishop, castle, promoted bishop, and promoted rook. This time, Second planned to acquire the pawn and spear skills for both swordsmanship and archery. He managed to acquire everything without difficulty. Next was sorcery. Sorcery consisted of 4 elements: fire, water, wind, and earth. Each element had 5 types called the Opyo, Raptor, Coeurl, 4th, and 5th forms. The grimoires in the Grand Royal Library were the same as those from the last time he was in Mabayon. Since only the 4 elements of the Opyo form were available, Second assumed that the other grimoires could be obtained at the Royal School of Magic or by completing high-difficulty quests. While considering this, he finished acquiring the Opyo form without a hitch. He had now finished reading all of the fundamental skill books he wanted to learn from the library, so Second decided to head back. On his way out, he saw the librarian fall to the ground after accidentally bumping into a man. Second narrowed his eyes, then shook off the thought and continued on his path. He could not help but think that the library had provided an abundant harvest. For his following plans, Second decided to train in a specific order. First, he would earn experience while maintaining a degree of safety by using long-range fire with archery. Second, he would solidify his position with swordsmanship, which dealt effective damage and was easy to use. Third, he would prepare his trump cards for harder enemies by using the high firepower of sorcery. The fourth was conjuration. The limited-time avatar he had bought when he created this alt named Second had included a premium spirit ticket. Using it would immensely raise the likelihood of summoning a rare spirit, leaving no reason not to improve his conjuration. However, there were limits to using conjuration as a primary means of battle, making it strictly an auxiliary skill. It would be best to begin raising it after archery, swordsmanship, and sorcery had been improved to a certain extent. Now that his plans had been promptly decided, Second allocated his experience points among the skills he had acquired to raise their rank. The weapon shop came to his mind. With that, he began upgrading his skills. For archery, he allocated only the borderline amount necessary to fight. For the Opyo form of sorcery, he raised it to the 5th class so that its casting time would be reduced. For pawn swordsmanship, he gave it enough to provide some insurance for situations in which he was forced into close-quarters combat. The experience points he could distribute to raise the skills this much had run out. Second decided to settle for what he had, as the fundamental skills were sufficient for now. If he needed more later, he could return to the Grand Royal Library to acquire them. Next, Second decided that he needed to learn the necessities of archery. The necessary skills for archery were not limited to pawn and spear, but also included knight, silver general, gold general, bishop, and castle. Each had its own special skill. Knight archery had precise shot, silver general archery had the powerful solo strike, gold general archery had spread strike and its knockback, bishop archery had the powerful pierce strike, and castle archery had the extremely powerful solo strike. Among these, knight archery, gold general archery, and castle archery were the most necessary. Learning them alone would increase the number of tactics available to him by 1 or 2 digits. However, these skills differed from the fundamental pawn and spear skills. Second went to the weapon shop and bought a long bow. As for the other condition for acquiring skills in Mabayan, he needed to complete skill quests. Nonetheless, if he was only trying to fulfill either one of the acquisition conditions, there was no need to accept any actual quests. After he paid, the owner thanked him, and Second continued on his way. He killed a monster on horseback and gained a new skill, knight archery. He then killed 20 more monsters in a row with a single shot each, gaining another skill named silver general archery. The next moment, he killed 10 monsters in a row within 3 meters and learned a new skill, gold general archery. Bishop archery was somewhat tedious because he needed to fulfill 2 conditions. He had to kill 5 monsters simultaneously using spear archery, then kill 2 monsters simultaneously at least 25 m away using a combination of spear archery and knight archery. With that, he finally learned bishop archery. Last but not least was castle archery, the most tedious yet most powerful amplified strike skill. Even at the 16th class, it was capable of single strikes that exerted 250% of pure firepower, and if raised as far as the 9th grade, that scale jumped to an astounding 600%. It was an extraordinary practical single-strike skill that could exert immense firepower more easily than any other archery skill. However, its acquisition conditions were exceptionally tedious. Even if all of the other tedious skills were combined, castle archery would likely rank among the worst 10. First, Second needed to kill 1,000 monsters using silver general archery and then achieve 500 critical hits using silver general archery. Those conditions would naturally be fulfilled as he continued going along, so they were not a major concern. The real problem was the final condition. He needed to kill 3 monsters in a row that had attacked and drained at least 50% of another player's HP, at least 5 m away, with a single shot each using a combination of knight archery and silver general archery. Second already found the requirement tedious just thinking about it. If he made even one mistake, he would have to do it all over again. It was downright hell. Second considered that if this were still the inside of an online game, he could ask some people to hold off until their HP had been drained by 50%, making the condition relatively easy to complete. But this was the real world now. Having 50% of their HP drained was ultimately life-threatening, making such a request futile. He wondered what would happen if he were to make that sort of situation occur 3 times, then quickly shook off the thought. That was even more futile. Even so, Second wanted castle archery no matter what. It was an absolutely indispensable skill in archery. He concluded that he had no choice but to accept the situation and fill it with something else, finally deciding to give up on completing the conditions for now. Inevitably, he chose to bury away the requirements of using silver general archery on 1,000 monsters and achieving 500 critical hits with silver general archery, simply awaiting an opportunity. That opportunity arrived in an unexpected way. It had been a week since his reincarnation. Second had taken advantage of the decay tactic, and had also raised his other skill ranks nicely. With that, Second decided it was time for swordsmanship. Just then, a loud scream echoed through the forest. From the other side came a man's curse as he attempted to cut open a path, but something struck him before he could finish. Second hid among the bushes and secretly watched. Then he spotted the monsters, scarlet mantises. At that moment, Second's eyes froze as he took in the scene. Humans and monsters clashed amid coarse breathing and clanging weapons. The smell of soil, the trickle of blood, the fear and the screams filled the surroundings. It was nothing like the Mabayan online world he knew. From his hiding spot, Second counted 5 people who had fallen to the ground and were not moving an inch. 5 more people stood ready with their swords drawn, forming a circular formation. At this rate they would be tormented and killed as well. A grin spread across Second's lips. With 5 people, he might be able to learn castle archery this way. He hesitated, considering whether he should wait until those 5 people's HP had been drained to gain more certainty. Then it struck him that he might indeed be able to learn castle archery this way. But this was not right. People were dying. They were not players. They were people, the same as him. Those people had lost what they had risked their lives for, only to accomplish it halfway. Now they were going to lose it again. Second could not simply let that happen. Such despair was intolerable. Without hesitation, Second emerged from the bushes, gripping his longbow. He warned the warriors to get down. The warriors turned toward him in surprise, but quickly snapped to attention and passed the warning to the others. Without wasting a moment, Second used his spear archery, 5th grade. He released an arrow with precision, striking his targets, and the monsters were defeated instantly. The warriors stood in shock. The knights stood in shock, and among them was Sylvia. Her eyes widened as she stared at Second. She could not help but think about how gallantly Second had rushed in during their predicament. His fearless posture reminded her of the world's number one. Sylvia's first impression of him had been absolutely terrible. She had thought he was merely a young noble boy who lacked common sense, had been raised comfortably in a spoiled environment without knowing hardship, and never considered how his actions might cause trouble for others. And yet, that man had obliterated 6 scarlet mantises in no more than 20 seconds. He had done it with an ordinary longbow and the improbable power of archery. Sylvia could not help wondering just how much intense learning he had accumulated. She also thought about herself. Ever since she was young, Sylvia had aspired to follow the path of the knight, coming this far with only a single blade in hand. However, it had been futile. No matter what she did, it was futile. Her family had ridiculed her for lacking talent with the sword. Even after finally joining the 3rd Chivalric Order, she found that they were at the lowest level of the law and spectacularly lax. Her strength had never been exhibited. They simply regarded her as some little girl who constantly annoyed them with her insistence on justice. Yet she could not even enforce that justice. Whenever she exposed and pursued a noble for their injustice, she was always pressured by her superiors. She had come to completely despise those wretched dogs in power. Even now, with her comrades dead, those rotten upper echelons were desperately trying to recruit their lifesaver, Second Dano, into the chivalric order. Sylvia clenched her fist. She questioned whether this was what the chivalric order was really like, and whether this was the image of a knight she had once yearned for and sought to become. If so, then she had already. Meanwhile, somewhere in town, a man spoke to Second about whether he had any intention of joining the Adventurers Guild. Second repeated the name of the organization with annoyance. In his mind, he had expected them to thank him for helping them during the fight, only to discover that those had been the old man's very first words. The man apologized and acknowledged that he had rushed things a little too much. He explained that he had heard Second Dano was an adventurer who was not affiliated with any guild. Second remained silent, thinking that he certainly was not affiliated with them, but there was no reason for him to be. The Adventurers Guild of the Kingdom of Castal was an organization that coordinated the agencies handling requests such as monster subjugation and carried them out. In reality, however, it was a dirty organization that exposed adventurers' personal information to the kingdom in order to allow it to unilaterally control them. Second knew this because it had been recorded in Mobian stories. He finally gave the man a response, respectfully declining the offer. The man was somewhat surprised and did not think it was a bad proposal. Second explained that he was not particularly worried about money and disliked being tied down by organizations. The man scratched his head and was about to add something. Second asked the man what it was, but the man dismissed it as nothing. He explained that the chivalric order would not want to let an exceptional freelance adventurer like Second Dano slip away. The incident this time had made Second Dano's true strength particularly clear to them, and in such a situation, the privileged had become eager to recruit him. Second questioned whether that meant the Adventurers Guild was going to protect him. The man confirmed that this was what it would amount to. Second smiled, but found the situation suspicious in his mind. The man claimed that his true strength had been made greatly apparent, yet the only witnesses at the scene had been members of the 3rd Chivalric Order. Second could not help wondering why they wanted him affiliated with a guild so badly. He felt that such an affiliation would only become a factor holding him back from becoming the world's number one. Second therefore decided to refrain from becoming affiliated after all. The man accepted his decision, then added that, in that case, Sylvia would accompany him. With the 3rd Chivalric Order at his side, they would be able to keep tabs on him to a degree. Just hearing Sylvia's name made Second shudder. The man continued by explaining that he was not sure what means could be used to convince a noble like Second Dano to join. Sylvia was famous even in the royal capital as a knight who was strict against nobles. The man thought she would be able to keep tabs on him reasonably well and wondered what Second Dano thought. Second furrowed his brow. He found the old man's endorsement of Sylvia quite dreadful. However, he did not know their true objective. Sylvia was strict against nobles, while the upper echelon of the chivalric order was tied to them. In other words, the chivalric order regarded Sylvia as a thorn in their side. Second wondered whether they were looking to demote her. If that was true, then it was an extremely good proposal for him. A duck with a scallion or not, it was a unique chance to gain a beautiful female knight as a comrade for free. Second asked how long Sylvia would stay with him. The old man told him to ask her himself. Just then, Sylvia arrived in her casual clothes. Second's eyes did not leave her. The old man informed Sylvia that from then on, she would take responsibility for being Second Dano's escort. As for the term, the chivalric order would consider respecting her and Second Dano's opinions. Upon hearing that, Sylvia was surprised. Second thought that her surprise was inevitable. This was an actual demotion. Furthermore, the old man's claim that he would respect Sylvia's opinion essentially implied that a single word from him was enough to decide Sylvia's term. It truly seemed that the chivalric order thought negatively of her. The old man asked Sylvia whether she had any particular desires regarding the term. With no choice, Sylvia replied that she did not. Her fist remained clenched against her chest. At the same moment, Second could not take his eyes off her. When he finally snapped out of it, he found the old man already judging him with a look. Second cleared his throat and proposed a term of 2 years. He thought that as long as he had those 2 years, he should have more than enough time to pursue the world's #1 position. The old man accepted without hesitation. And like that, the female knight Sylvia became Second's escort. After the meeting, the old man had a private talk with Sylvia, but her mind was elsewhere. She could not help thinking that this was a demotion and that the chivalric order was getting rid of dead weight. Sylvia was the second daughter of the Knight Order of Virginia. Becoming a knight and distinguishing oneself in battle was the duty of those born into the Virginia family. However, it had been futile for her. She had no talent for the sword. She had been scorned by her older brother and sister, as well as by her parents. She was a failure. Even after she had finally become a knight, it was. Second snapped her out of her thoughts and suggested that they make a deal. He suspected that the old man had told her to seduce him into joining the chivalric order or something similar. Sylvia jolted in surprise. She could not understand why he was saying that. Second Dano had suddenly started saying something like that, and it was possible that too many shocking things had happened at once. Sylvia answered that she would hear what Second had to say. She was unaware that the deal would greatly change her life from then on, forever. Second began by explaining that he was sure his dear Sylvia wanted to work proudly as a knight more than anything, and that he wanted to help her. Meanwhile, Sylvia could not help thinking about Second Dano. Her heart had skipped a little when he called her by name directly. He had an extremely superior appearance, yet until this very moment, she had never had time to become engrossed in love because she had always been focused on her sword. However, after drinking mead like this, those kinds of feelings were beginning to well up inside her. Second continued by suggesting that if she was sick of her current situation, she should build the resolve to quit the Third Chivalric Order once and for all and go out with him. Hearing that, Sylvia's cheeks flushed red as she stammered in shock. Second quickly tried to calm her down, explaining that he was making a deal. Still flushed red, Sylvia forced herself to calm down. This was just a deal. It was not a proposal at all. She quickly drank the drink in her hand in one gulp. Seeing that she had calmed down somewhat, Second continued. He assumed Sylvia could not stand yielding to those wicked authorities. In that case, she simply needed to build up adequate power, and he had the means to make that happen. Sylvia's face turned serious. For 13 years, ever since she was 4 years old, she had always trained herself with the sword, yet she had not carried out a single act of justice. Silence spread between them. Second scratched his head and apologized before frankly suggesting that if she lacked talent for the sword, she should simply try something else, such as the spear or the bow. Sylvia's eyes widened. In anger, she grabbed Second's collar. She could not believe he would say such a thing after everything she had endured up until now. Sylvia gritted her teeth, but then something struck her. She released her hands from him. She finally admitted that Second Dano was right. She had grown stubborn. Even though people kept telling her that she did not have the talent for it, she continued training with the sword. Knights were champions of justice who wore armor, wielded swords, rode horses, and came gallantly running in during predicaments. Sylvia had always wanted to become a knight. A prominent knight. A champion of justice who would never yield to the likes of evil. Tears welled up in Sylvia's eyes. She wondered how she could be so pitiful. Her tears began to fall. Second frankly told her to stop arbitrarily forcing her aspiration for a knight into such a narrow form. Anything could serve as a weapon. What mattered was being a champion of justice who came gallantly running in during predicaments. Sylvia fell silent, thinking that he was right. There was no need to be obsessed over the appearance of a knight. What mattered was gallantly running in during a predicament. Sylvia's eyes widened as an image of Second flashed through her mind. She remembered the moment he had come to save them, and her gaze filled with wonder. After a moment, Sylvia finally made her decision. She told Second Dano that she would go out with him. Second's lips curved into a pleased smile at her response. Meanwhile, Sylvia stared at his face with wide eyes, her cheeks flushing red before she hurriedly looked away. Second then continued by saying that, in that case, he would share his dream with her. With that preface, Second spoke with great zeal about becoming the world's #1 no matter what. It was a big dream, astonishing and laughable at the same time, Sylvia thought. However, his smile as he spoke about it was like that of a little boy, and his eyes sparkled. In that case, Sylvia wanted to try going with him and helping him. She was sure interesting things would happen. She could be confident of that. It was her first time experiencing such a refreshing night. Her future had brightened. Later that night, after the discussion, they parted ways and returned to their rooms. Second sat on his bed. Slowly, the smile spreading across his lips turned into a loud laugh, and his laughter echoed outside. He had not expected things to work out this well. He had gotten a heartbroken girl drunk and then won her over with an extremely dirty tactic, but he was sure it would be for her sake as well. Sylvia probably had talent in archery or sorcery. Considering that she had practiced swordsmanship for 13 years and was still completely helpless with it, Second could only imagine that her growth type was either DX aligned or INT aligned. There was also a chance that she was a production type, but whatever the case, it did not matter. Getting a comrade was incredibly significant. This way, his security in battle would shoot up. Managing to win Sylvia over after getting her to sever her ties with the troublesome chivalric order was significant as well. It was as if, in just one single day, he had killed 2 birds with 1 stone. No, 3 birds. No, it was actually 4 birds. Frankly, when he defeated the Scarlet Mantises were not really significant monsters. Considering his current status, it would have been strange for him not to win. Come to think of it, that meant this had been the perfect opportunity. He had also managed to learn the castle archery he had been longing for. Second could not help but smile in excitement as he thought about how fun the days were going to be starting tomorrow. First of all, for Sylvia's training, she would need to acquire the necessary skills for swordsmanship. He also wanted to head into dungeons to earn EXP, and it seemed interesting to try hunting for rare item drops as well. Another wave of laughter escaped him. Meanwhile, the receptionist outside was puzzled by why he was laughing again. With a puzzled face, Sylvia asked about magic archery. Second explained that he thought being a magic archer specializing in sorcery and archery would probably suit her. Sylvia's DX was 121, her INT was 103, and all her other stats were in the double digit. She was a DX type, while her INT was also unnaturally high, which meant she was suited to the magic archer type. Sylvia had never heard of magic archery before. Hearing that, Second wondered whether it did not exist in this world. He could have sworn it was a relatively popular job in Mabayan. That was not good. Second asked whether she knew of any skills that combined sorcery and archery, but Sylvia did not. Second shrugged it off, explaining that something like that did exist and that she would be aiming for it anyway. Still confused, Sylvia accepted. Second instructed her to first acquire the fundamental skills necessary for archery at the library. Afterward, they would head to the forest, where he would have her join him in acquiring the necessary skills for swordsmanship. Sylvia looked completely puzzled. Second felt as though he were somehow teaching a newbie the basics of Mabayan again. He told her that was all she needed to do and that she should simply follow him. Sylvia's eyes remained on him, and Second gave her a questioning look. Sylvia smiled and agreed. Second was a bit taken aback by her sweet smile. Afterward, in the forest, Sylvia looked completely shocked at how Second knew such things. Second calmly asked why she was so angry. Sylvia explained that she was not angry but dumbfounded. Things such as the acquisition methods for bishop archery and castle archery were the most hidden of hidden facts. They were intel that nobles inherited for generations and had to keep to themselves. After hearing that, Second finally understood. That explained why the levels were low in this world. He realized that nobles did enjoy having privileges after all. Sylvia warned that if he tried to let nobles know about something like this, he would be tortured to death. Second asked her to keep the intel to herself. Sylvia protested that if she used such advanced archery, she would be exposed instantly. Second calmly reasoned that she simply should not use it in public. Sylvia paused as she realized that was possible. Afterward, while bringing Sylvia along, Second was continually bothered by her questions everywhere. He got her to acquire knight archery, silver general archery, gold general archery, and bishop archery. Like him, Sylvia also managed to learn them without difficulty at the time. At the cave, Sylvia wiped the sweat from her forehead and admitted that although it felt as though she had already experienced a lifetime's worth of surprises that day, Second casually remarked that it was still too early to be surprised. Sylvia flinched. Second then asked how she thought he had used these methods to raise his EXP. Hundreds of bottles of high potions were suddenly transferred to Sylvia. Shocked by the sight of so many expensive potions, Sylvia wondered whether Second was seriously telling her to put all of them into her ass or something. Second quickly denied saying anything of the sort. He explained that they were going to use them to perform the DK tactic. Sylvia remained confused about the DK tactic. Meanwhile, Second thought that the loudest what of the day would surely echo through the cave. Just as he expected, Sylvia's scream rang across the cavern in shock. Later, they returned to town. While eating, Second asked Sylvia whether she wanted to learn castle archery. Sylvia answered hesitantly that if she could learn it, she would like to. Second immediately decided that they would go to a dungeon that day. Sylvia was shocked by the prospect of going to a dungeon. Second thought that this time they would explore a second-ranked dungeon called Roy's. Dungeons were separated into 3 ranks: first, second, and third, with the first being expert, the second intermediate, and the third beginner. There were 2 reasons for suddenly entering the intermediate Roy's dungeon. First was the reward for conquering the dungeon. Roy's dungeon's boss was a large wolf-like monster called Flame Wolf, which dropped a rare weapon called the Flame Wolf Bow. It was a superior long bow endowed with fire elemental effects, and Second wanted to acquire it no matter what. The greater goal, however, was Sylvia's acquisition of Castle Archery, which could be considered the main objective. The ideal monsters for fulfilling the completion requirements appeared in this dungeon. Simply put, their objective this time was to search for rare drops while fulfilling the skill acquisition requirements together. Sylvia cautiously looked around, remaining alert. Just then, Second announced that he had found them, causing Sylvia to gasp in surprise. He explained that these were the monsters they had come for and instructed Sylvia to try defeating them with Silver General as best she could. If she was not used to it yet, she should also practice combining Knight with Silver General. Sylvia accepted the instruction. Without hesitation, she grabbed the string of her longbow and pulled it back, carefully aiming at the monster before releasing the arrow. The monster was defeated instantly. Sylvia froze where she stood before tremblingly asking Second Dano whether she had somehow become incredibly powerful. Second noted in his thoughts that with the DK tactic, Sylvia's EXP had skyrocketed, and both her Knight Archery and Silver General Archery had reached the first grade. He gave a confident smile and reminded her that he had promised this. Sylvia's eyes widened before she broke into a bright smile, acknowledging that he had and thanking him. Meanwhile, Second could not help but think that she was pretty beautiful like this, though usually she was like that instead. Afterward, Sylvia became uncontrollably excited. She was in perfect condition and extremely helpful as backup, and she now seemed suddenly zealous. Sylvia declared her determination to become a magic archer. Suddenly, Second noticed something ahead and immediately told Sylvia to stop. He thought that it had been almost 6 hours since they entered the dungeon. They were now down to one last aforementioned requirement for Sylvia to acquire Castle Archery. The aforementioned requirement was to kill 3 monsters in a row that had attacked and drained at least 50% of another player's HP, from at least 5 m away, with a single shot each using a combination of Knight Archery and Silver General Archery. The reason they had stopped there was because their target monster had appeared. The ground trembled with every step the giant monster took. Second noted in his thoughts that the flaming troll was a large monster with exceptional attack power. However, its shiny, smooth cranium was a very obvious weak spot. For a headshot, a single shot with Sylvia's first-grade Silver General Archery should be enough. He could see 3 flaming trolls before him, making the situation perfect. Second then glanced at Sylvia and instructed her to use a combination of Knight and Silver General to fire at their craniums from at least 5 m away. She was to fire after he gave her the signal. Sylvia accepted but wondered what Second was going to do. Second vaguely explained that he was going to embrace the inevitable and warned her not to lose her cool no matter what. Sylvia immediately nodded. Second then checked his stat. His HP was full. In terms of numbers, his VIT should be enough to withstand 3 critical hits from the flaming trolls. A nervous sweat trickled down Second's face as he forced himself to believe that everything was fine. But it was not fine. This was seriously frightening. Even so, this step was absolutely necessary for the rear guard for Castle Archery, and he had to resolve himself to endure it there. Just then, a powerful strike hit him in the face, sending him flying through the air. Seeing this, Sylvia called out to Second Dano. Second hit the ground and wondered what had happened, finding the attack unheard of. He coughed up blood and checked his stats again. Even after that hit, his HP had barely decreased by a quarter. Second worried about whether his back teeth would recover. If this had been Mabayon, even losing an arm could be recovered by drinking a high-grade potion, but he had forgotten that there was no guarantee of that in this world. He began to question whether this had been a bad idea. Second pushed himself to his feet, refusing to accept that it was over while Sylvia was still waiting for him. The massive troll towered over him. Second froze in horror, but shut his mouth and forced himself to stand his ground. He was the number 1. The world's number 1 would never show an unsightly side. He resolved that he would become the world's number 1 in this world too, even if he was an alt character. He was the world's number 1, and the throne was his. It was his life, his raison d'etre, and he would not give it up to anyone. He was the world's number 1. Second continued repeating those thoughts in his mind until the fear dissipated, then bravely faced the troll. He braced himself for the attack. Just then, the troll struck him hard with its weapon, slamming him into the wall before sending him to the ground. Second wondered about the impact and immediately checked his HP. Seeing that it had been reduced to just under 50%, he signaled Sylvia to fire. Sylvia, standing by at a distance, aimed her arrow and released it with precision. It struck the troll's cranium and defeated it instantly. Second smirked, knowing that only 2 more remained. Sylvia immediately rushed toward him, furious at his reckless actions. After everything was over, she scolded Second while crying, tears welling up as she continued calling him a fool. Second, however, continued to smirk. They exited the dungeon. Sylvia was shocked that she had finally learned castle archery and could hardly believe it was real. She repeatedly expressed her amazement to Second Dano, overwhelmed by how incredible it was. Seeing her rejoice, Second smiled, feeling an extremely uncanny sense of satisfaction. From the depths of his heart, he felt glad that he had endured. His alt-character life in this alternative universe would now be filled with excitement after acquiring this comrade named Sylvia. After what happened, the 2 of them pulled themselves together and advanced through Roy's dungeon. All that remained was the boss. Second warned that beyond the door was the home of the Flame Wolves. The boss of Royk's dungeon, the Flame Wolf, was a powerful monster with a large wolf's body dressed in flames. Its flame barrier made it sufficiently resistant to damage, and everyone in Mabayon unanimously judged it to be a pain in the ass. Second decided that they would stunlock it. Sylvia was confused by the unfamiliar term. Second recalled that he had once managed to turn the Flame Wolves into the equivalent of trash-tier small fry, and the main reason for that had been stunlocking. He checked whether Sylvia was listening before explaining the plan. First, he would attack using bishop archery. The Flame Wolf would continue running toward him, so he would repel it using Gold General. Afterwards, Sylvia would attack it using bishop archery and repel the Flame Wolf rushing toward her with Gold General. He would then fire at it using bishop archery, and the process would be repeated. Second noted inwardly that this was a convenient technique for conquering the Flame Wolf, and that its name was the ultimate gold bishop stun. It was a famous stun technique performed by 2 or more people. Sylvia hesitated over whether such a simple method would actually work. Second explained that it had nothing to do with whether it worked or not, it was simply the safest method. With that settled, they proceeded. The 2 of them defeated the Flame Wolf and died. 3 weeks later, Sylvia acquired castle archery without a hitch. All that remained was obtaining a drop called the Flame Wolf's Bow. They ventured around Roy's dungeon every day and killed 100 and a few dozen Flame Wolves before the bow finally dropped. Sylvia exclaimed over the Flame Wolf's bow and concluded that Second Dano would now become even more powerful. Second cut her off, questioning what she was talking about and explaining that the bow was hers. Sylvia was shocked upon hearing that. Second reminded her that she was going to become a magic archer, so there was nothing wrong with her using the bow for the time being. He handed it to her and explained that he was going to shift towards sorcery from then on, leaving him with no particular plans to use it. He told her to put it to good use. Sylvia hesitated over whether she could really have such a fine bow, but Second confirmed that it was fine. She then thanked him. She glanced back at him, wondering what he had said just before. Second flatly repeated the description of Sylvia as a motormouth numbskull. Sylvia gasped in shock at the remark and wondered whether he had really said something like that. Second clarified that he was shifting to sorcery. Sylvia understood that this was what he had meant, but pointed out that she had never heard him mention it before. Second apologized for never having told her. Sylvia pouted for a moment before smiling. She reflected that it had been archery, then swordsmanship, and now sorcery, and wondered whether becoming the world's #1 was no longer just a pipe dream. Second acknowledged that he still had a long way to go. He then decided that he needed to consult her about what would happen from there. Sylvia repeated the matter of connections to a Royal Academy of Magic. Second confirmed that she was the second daughter of the Knight Order of the Virginia family and asked whether she had any connections or something similar. Second noted inwardly that learning sorcery skills involved reading grimoires. Grimoires for the Opio form could be found in libraries, but the Raptor and Coral forms were fundamentally only found within academies of magic. No matter what it took, he had to infiltrate an academy of magic. The reason he had to infiltrate one ultimately had to do with saving time. The Royal Academy of Magic was off limits to anyone who was not a teacher or student. Second could take the formal route of enrolling to gain entry, but he was unsure how much time would pass before he was actually enrolled. That was why he wanted to leverage some connections and have them permitted to explore the Academy of Magic for a short while. Sylvia explained that it was impossible. Her father had abandoned her for having no talent with the sword, and she could not imagine him granting a request from such a useless daughter. Second suggested that, in that case, she should show her father her capabilities now. Sylvia refused, explaining that her father would remain strict even if she did. Her father had distinguished himself in battle through his own swordsmanship and had become knighted. He would likely say that she had abandoned the sword and escaped to the bow. Hearing this, Second realized that Sylvia's concern about being unable to deal with her father was becoming serious. He guessed that a frontal attack would work here. Since he had no other choice, he decided that he could only deceive Sylvia's father. Second told her that he had a good idea. Sylvia gave him a suspicious look, feeling that she was getting a tremendously bad vibe about it for some reason. Second smirked and announced that they would have an overall strategy, which he called the deception tactic, and that they would put it into action the next day. Sylvia broke into a cold sweat, feeling that her heart was not ready. The next day, Sylvia's father knelt and showed his respects as he welcomed Second. Second was filled with disbelief and wondered inwardly how things had become like this. He had gotten Sylvia excited by calling it the deception tactic, but all he had actually planned was to wear some rare clothes, act like a foreign aristocrat, and deceive Sylvia's father into writing them referral letters to the Academy of Magic. Somehow, he had remarkably deceived Sylvia's father, Noir-san. It appeared that Noir-san believed him to be of foreign royalty. Second could not understand what degree of strange misunderstanding had led to this. In the end, Second felt compelled to tell Sylvia's father the truth for many reasons, though he no longer understood any of it himself. He told Sylvia's father to raise his head. Second realized inwardly that he could no longer turn back now that things had come this far. He would try persisting with this somewhat prestigious persona and act as much as he could. Second explained to Noir that, due to some circumstances, he was concealing his identity and assumed that Noir-san understood. Noir confirmed that he would not tell another soul. Second inwardly smirked. He had simply taken a chance blindly, but it looked like everything would work out after all. Second explained that he had come with 2 requests that day. Noir politely assured him that whatever Second Dano requested would be granted. Second reminded himself that no matter how much of a numbskull Sylvia's father was, he must not lose focus. He decided to begin with the trivial request. He wanted to establish a connection with the Royal Academy of Magic and asked whether Noir-san would be able to do something. Noir confirmed that he could, adding that if Second was looking to transfer in as a first-year student, he could write him a referral letter immediately. Second muttered inwardly that becoming a transfer student would not be good. It would last too long. He only needed to infiltrate the academy for a short while and blaze through their grimoires. Second explained to Noir that he would prefer a shorter stay and asked whether there were any ideas for accomplishing that. Noir suggested that Second could instead assume the form of a short-term exchange student. Second understood and acknowledged the idea. He then considered how long the exchange should last. He would prefer it to be as short as possible, but if he went there for only 2 to 3 days and failed to find the whereabouts of the grimoires by then, it would be bad. Since he had his doubts, he decided that perhaps he should choose a period that was a little longer. Second finally decided on 2 weeks and told Noir that he would make it 2 weeks long. He asked Noir to write him a referral letter with those details. Noir agreed to do so. Second continued by confirming that, if nothing more was needed for the trivial request, they could move on to the important request. Noir agreed. Second got straight to the point. He explained that this lord had taken a liking to Sylvia and that she possessed talent for archery and sorcery. He asked Noir-san to permit her to travel by his side. Feeling Noir's intense stare, Second worried inwardly. Although he had not thought of a first-person pronoun on the spot, he wondered how referring to himself as a lord sounded. Noir-san stared at him in wonder, which made Second realize that it might not have been a good idea after all. Noir gasped and asked Second to raise his head. He acknowledged that Sylvia might be an undisciplined daughter, but if His Highness was fine with her, he could use her however he wished. Second inwardly repeated the title of His Highness. Noir then questioned whether Second was truly certain about Sylvia. Second explained that she certainly lacked talent with the sword. However, her skill with archery and sorcery could surely be considered world-famous. This lord assured Noir-san that Sylvia should leave the chivalric order to accompany him. Noir echoed in disbelief at Sylvia possessing such talent. Second added that he had borrowed her from the 3rd Chivalric Order on a 2-year contract. Once the contract was over, he planned to request that she become his, and at that time, he wanted Noir Dano's support. Noir replied with due respect that he would certainly provide it. All he asked for was a flourishing service for Sylvia. Even as he remained there on his land, he would patiently wait in his home for the praises that would surely arrive. Meanwhile, Sylvia's face turned bright red. Second secretly glanced at her and wondered what Noir Dano was really saying, but he guessed that it could be considered an acceptance. Second smirked and remarked inwardly that Noir Dano's spirit was admirable. He would never forget the Virginia family. Afterward, once they were outside, Sylvia shouted that Second was a dummy, an even bigger dummy. No matter how many hearts she had, it would not be enough to deal with being together with Second Dano. Meanwhile, Second reflected inwardly that although they had managed to secure their connection to the Royal Academy of Magic, somehow things had taken a turn far more drastic than he had expected, which was a little frightening. Deceiving people was not something someone should do. He had reflected on it a tiny bit. A week passed since the reception tactic had been used. Since then, Sylvia and Second had been selling flame wolf pelts, earning experience points, and enjoying a fairly perfect lifestyle. They primarily earned experience from slime-type monsters. If they advanced deep into the slime forest on the way to the mines from the royal capital, there was a place within where rare slimes with juicy experience often appeared. Their greatest find, there was a drop they managed to obtain from a holy slime called Recovery Sorcery Wand Med. It was an ultra-rare item with a 0.05% drop rate. As long as they had the Recovery Sorcery Wand Med equipped, anyone could easily use Recovery Med from Recovery Sorcery. It was an extremely useful item. In particular, characters whose growth type was set to the healer type could manifest its true worth when equipping it. When healer types used it, it granted a plus effect. While plus was a second-tier boost, adding it meant that the wand's effect could be expected to become 2.5 times stronger than normal. When it came to Recovery Med, a plus boost could cause at least half the HP of someone at an intermediate level to recover instantly. Even things such as broken back teeth required only a trivial amount to recover. Second told Sylvia that they would head to the Academy of Magic now. Second noted inwardly that, when considering how the wand could reduce their consumption of high-class potions that cost 800,000 CL a pop, the power of this additional effect became clear. Since neither Sylvia nor Second had the healer type set as their growth type, they could not gain the plus effect. Nonetheless, being able to use Recovery Med unconditionally was already significant. It was all thanks to the Holy Slime, and Second considered it a magnificent gift from him. Even the guy over there was happily going behind those blades of grass. And now, at the Royal Academy of Magic, after earning some items and experience, Sylvia and Second bided their time and finally arrived at the Royal Academy of Magic. After dismounting from their horses, a woman welcomed them and confirmed that their arrival had been expected. Second thanked the two professors for going out of their way to pick them up. The man asked whether he could call him Second Kun. Second agreed and introduced himself as Second, adding that the girl beside him was Sylvia and that they would be counting on the two professors to look after them for the next 2 weeks. The woman stepped forward and introduced herself as the headmaster, Paula Memento, expressing her hope that they would get along nicely. The man then introduced himself as Kevin, the homeroom teacher of the first-year Class A that Second Kun was slated to enter, and expressed his hope that they would get along well. Second asked whether Sylvia would be in the same Class A as him. Headmaster Paula confirmed that she would, explaining that during their exchange, Second would be lodging in a house rather than their dormitory, so their rooms would not be separated. She then suggested that they proceed, as their uniforms had also been prepared. While following them, Second muttered inwardly that things seemed fine for the time being. It did not seem like anyone particularly suspected them, but they would need to remain focused over the next 2 weeks. Professor Kevin informed them that they would be holding a lesson in the morning and that he was considering giving them a tour of the school in the afternoon. Second asked whether Professor Kevin would be giving him the tour. Kevin explained that a student would do so instead. He had recruited someone from Class A the other day, and it had already been decided. Afternoons were generally self-study periods, but their superior students had free time. Second acknowledged this and expressed his thanks. In the back of his mind, he planned to squeeze information out of his guide once the afternoon arrived, although he would only be asking about the whereabouts of the grimoires. Professor Kevin then informed them that they had arrived and that this was Class A. Professor Kevin entered the room first. He greeted everyone and announced that, as he had informed them all the other day, 2 exchange students would be joining Class A for 2 weeks starting that day. He then called for Second Kun and Sylvia-san to come in. Immediately, all eyes turned toward the two of them. Second introduced himself first, stating his name and explaining that he had come from an island country called Zipong to check the place out. He expressed his hope that they would get along well. The girls in class could not help but shriek upon seeing him smile. One girl exclaimed over how handsome he was. Another wondered whether he was not terrific, while someone else remarked that he was seriously super hot. Sylvia stepped forward and shyly introduced herself as Sylvia Virginia, adding that she hoped they could all get along. Kevin thanked them and directed the two of them to their seat. While the girls could not take their eyes off Second, the boys were equally struck by Sylvia's striking appearance and whispered among themselves about how cute she was. Kevin told everyone that, since this was a rare occasion, they would review the basics once more. Meanwhile, Second wondered whether he would even be able to learn the sorceries he needed within the next 2 weeks. He was becoming somewhat worried, and once the lesson was over, he planned to quickly have them show him around. After class ended, Second went straight to Professor Kevin and asked him to introduce the person who would be showing him around that afternoon. He explained that he was thinking of getting a ready-made meal and deepening his friendship with the guide. Kevin smiled and agreed. He then called for a boy named Main Kun. The boy stepped forward and asked whether the professor had called him. Kevin asked Main whether he was ready for the afternoon tour. Although the schedule had been sped up, Kevin also asked him to show Second Kun the cafeteria. Main agreed that it was fine. Second excused himself and asked whether he could also ask Main questions about sorcery. Second reasoned inwardly that it would be better to ask first before trying to strip information from Main, since he would rather not risk disadvantaging himself by doing so. Kevin assured him that it was not a problem at all, as Main was the representative of the first years. Second understood and realized that his question had been foolish. A grin spread across his lips as he thought about Kevin's description of Maine as the representative. Wouldn't that mean he could strip whatever information he wanted from Maine? Second turned to Maine and suggested that they get along well during the tour. Maine smiled and agreed, expressing the same sentiment toward Second-san. Second thought inwardly that this was good. Maine was not being cautious toward him, so he planned to squeeze the whereabouts of the grimoires out of him this way. Before that, Second informed Sylvia, who was surrounded by their classmates, that they were heading to the cafeteria. Sylvia agreed, then apologized to her classmates and asked them to let her through. She hurried over and apologized to Second for keeping him waiting. However, the moment she noticed who was standing beside him, she froze in shock. Her words stumbled as she addressed Maine as His Highness. Second's eyes widened in surprise as the title echoed in his mind. Maine calmly explained that there was no difference in status inside the school and asked her to treat him as an equal if possible. Sylvia nervously apologized and corrected herself by addressing him as Maine Dono. Meanwhile, Second reflected that Maine was a prince. It was his first time seeing one here. This was different from what he had expected. He had imagined Maine saying something like making everyone kneel, yet Maine had instead asked to be treated as an equal. Second guessed that he should do so then. Without warning, Maine grabbed Second's hand and led him toward the cafeteria together. Second stared at their joined hands and wondered inwardly how Maine could be so cold toward a beautiful girl like Sylvia while being so assertive with a pretty boy like him. It felt as though he was being pulled into something. Could this guy really be that way? The thought seriously bothered him, and consequently, Second decided that he needed to genuinely face Maine about it as well. He could hardly believe that the day had come when he would be targeted by a prince. Second wondered how he should reject Maine. Nervous sweat trickled down his face as he concluded that he could only ask Maine directly. Second suddenly stopped in his tracks and confronted Maine about whether he swung that way. Maine halted immediately and turned toward him in shock. He loudly denied it and demanded to know what Second was talking about all of a sudden. Sylvia stood there with her jaw hanging open. Second explained that it simply seemed as though, instead of Sylvia, Maine was a little like. He trailed off while wondering how he should put it. Maine gasped in disbelief and demanded to know what Second meant by that, insisting that Second was mistaken and that he was completely straight. Second calmly accepted the explanation. At that moment, a small girl suddenly bumped into him. Second glanced down but did not see anyone. He looked around, wondering whether he had just bumped into someone. Perhaps it had been his imagination. Meanwhile, the girl continued along her path and quietly remarked that the man was super handsome. With sparkling eyes, Maine told Second that he was fond of him. Sylvia stared at Second, wondering what was with his proud attitude. Second explained that they were talking to the world's #1 man. Sylvia's jaw dropped wide. Meanwhile, Maine exclaimed that this was exactly what he meant about Second-san, saying that it was his first time talking to such an honest person. He explained that he had been thrilled when he heard that differences in status were disregarded if one enrolled in the Royal Academy of Magic, but in the end, everyone only saw him as the second prince. Whether at the Royal Palace or at the Academy, they saw him as nothing more than the second prince. It really seemed that only his mother saw him for who he truly was. Second commented that it was a pretty typical story. Hearing that, Sylvia smacked his chest, accusing him of being impolite. Maine quickly stopped her, saying that it was all right and pointing out that she was talking to a man who, right after realizing he was a prince, had bluntly asked him if he swung that way. At this point, impoliteness or anything else no longer mattered. Shrugging it off, Second asked Maine if he knew where the grimoires were stored. Maine explained that, if Second meant inside the academy, there were some for the Opo-Opo and Raptor forms in the library. The Coral form was also in the library, though permission from the head librarian was required to borrow it. As for the fourth form, Second interrupted to ask whether they had it there as well. Maine replied that they did not, believing that the fourth form was being safeguarded at the royal palace since he had seen it there once before. Second understood. Maine then said that it was probably about time they headed off, and he proceeded to guide them. They were being bloody courteous to the point that Second wanted Maine to spare them his afternoon tour of the academy. By the time they arrived at their main dish, the library, the sun had already completely set. Maine informed them that they had finally arrived at the library, though it was already closed. He added that any student of the Royal Academy of Magic could use the library and urged them to visit it as soon as tomorrow. He then waved at them, expressing that today had been super fun and that he would see Second-san and Sylvia-san tomorrow. After Maine left, Second released a heavy sigh, his shoulders feeling stiff. Sylvia replied that this should be her line. Second gave her a questioning look before informing her that starting tomorrow, Sylvia was going to be confined to the library and would learn fire magic. Second noted in his thoughts that, to acquire magic archery, mastering sorcery was necessary. At the very least, He wanted her to learn the raptor form of fire and the coral form of fire to use in combination with the flame wolf's bow, which was imbued with fire. Just then, a loud laughing voice echoed from behind. One man remarked that Second knew, right, before adding that, nevertheless, he had seen them, those exchange students. The man beside him nodded and confirmed that he had. They looked scary, both the guy and the girl. The other man added that he had seen them together with His Highness Maine, and there must have been something going on with them. The other man asked if he meant that bookworm with an Oedipus complex. The first man tried to stop him, warning that he should not say something like that, but the other assured him that it was fine because nobody was listening and admitted that he was honestly thinking the same thing as well. Meanwhile, both Sylvia and Second hid themselves behind the walls, eavesdropping. The man continued by expressing how much that guy certainly irritated him, especially with his condescending look. The prince always sounded sarcastic whenever he said something about not worrying over his status. That was why the prince was always alone. The other man burst into laughter, pointing out that the prince was completely alone and deserved it. The man laughed in agreement. Meanwhile, Second worriedly thought that the gossip was giving off a seriously unpleasant vibe now. So Maine had been alone after all. That said, Second wondered whether this could be considered indirect bullying. He supposed he had no choice, then, and decided that he would become the prince's friend. Perhaps he would be able to build a connection with the Castall royal family and get them to show him the fourth form's grimoire. He felt that he totally had no choice. The man added that the prince spent a lot of money to get his grades changed and was becoming cocky despite being the prince. The other pointed out that the prince was becoming rather detestable, even though he pretended to be a damned honor student on the outside. The man added that becoming buddies with those so-called exchange students was just as bad, saying that trash should quietly file up together before dismissing it as a joke. The other man smirked in agreement and added that, if they were going there, they had to include that beast loser too. The man agreed, saying that he had forgotten about him, that failure as well. He burst into laughter, but when he glanced to his side, he suddenly stopped upon realizing that it was Sylvia. Meanwhile, Second was surprised to see that Sylvia was now standing before those guys. The man gasped in shock upon realizing that she was the exchange student. Sylvia glared at him angrily, calling him a bastard and demanding to know whether what they had said was bestial discrimination. The man could only stand there in stunned silence. Sylvia repeated the question, again asking whether it was bestial discrimination. The other man quickly denied it, explaining that she probably did not know about Eco Leaflet, a loser in Class F. The first man backed him up, saying that Eco Leaflet was seriously incompetent and only happened to be a beastfolk by coincidence, so they were not discriminating against anyone. Sylvia responded that, if that was the case, they should explain why they had called Secondano and her trash. The men immediately broke into a cold sweat. One of them nervously tried to reassure her that she would understand if they explained. Without warning, Sylvia smashed their heads with her fist and shouted that it was too late. The men quickly ran away. Sylvia then smiled in satisfaction, declaring that justice had been served. As she proudly puffed out her chest to herself, Second told her they should head back. Meanwhile, he could not help thinking about what the men had mentioned earlier. The beast loser called Eco Leaflet seemed worth remembering for now. The next day, in the afternoon, Second went straight to the library. He told the librarian that he wanted to read the grimoires for the raptor form, all elements. The librarian smiled and assured him that there was no problem, asking him to give her a moment. Shortly after, she returned and gave him what he had requested. Second scanned through the grimoires about the raptor form of fire. After closing the book, he proceeded to the next one and handed the book to Sylvia. She wondered whether he was already finished. Second confirmed that he was and that he had acquired it. Sylvia could only marvel at how it was just another day for him. With Sylvia glancing at Second from the side in amazement, he casually and lightly flipped through the remaining 3 books as well before handing them over to her. He had learned all of them. Meanwhile, Sylvia sighed, wondering whether she could even learn this in 2 weeks. She asked Secondano if he had any tricks or something he could share with her. Second paused, thinking about how much he hated terms like tricks, secrets, and key points. In his previous life, when he was the world's #1, those damn newbies had constantly hassled him with questions about whether he could teach them some tricks to get stronger, whether he had any tricks for raising their player skills, and so on. It was seriously depressing, with people wanting to ask the world's #1 for shortcuts that would let them breeze through everything. He had incredibly unpleasant memories of their most obvious and extremely selfish motive. And yet, so what? In the end, he was hearing the term tricks being used again after arriving in this world. Surprisingly, it did not sound the slightest bit unpleasant. Sylvia thought it would cause her trouble if she could not acquire these skills within 2 weeks, so she was swallowing her pride and asking him for some trick. Seeing that consideration was truly pleasing to him. This was different from some casual human relationship over the internet. This was a truly intimate exchange, a world of difference from his previous life. Far from being unpleasant, he was actually glad that she was relying on him. Second suddenly moved closer to her and changed his plans. He had intended for them to do this separately that day, but he decided to teach her instead. Sylvia blushed when their shoulders lightly bumped. Filled with a feeling he was experiencing for the first time in his life, the genuine delight of teaching something to another person, Second sat beside Sylvia, who looked remorseful yet happy. Sylvia's face flushed red as they sat close together. Second began teaching her, and after some time had passed, he decided they would stop there for the day. Second reflected that, unfortunately, he had taken a serious look at the contents of the grimoires for the first time, and they were absolutely wordy and difficult to understand. Rather than reading books like these, studying something more practical would be 10,000 times better. For Sylvia, he explained as many memorable pointers as possible, similar to those they would find on Wikia, such as what kind of magical effect each spell had, how they should use them, how fire power was calculated, and the changes and cooldowns at each rank. During the lesson, Sylvia wondered whether she was supposed to memorize all of it. Second confirmed that she was. Thinking about it, this was the only kind of stuff he had ever bothered to study. Yet this knowledge about Mabayon was something he had studied more than anyone else. Knowledge that was not the slightest bit useful in real life had now become a more powerful weapon than anything else. He could not be anything but happy about that. Second asked whether she had managed to learn them. Sylvia shook her head and apologized, saying that she wanted to look at them a little longer. Second understood and told her not to fret over it. He then suggested that they head back. On their way back, a girl suddenly exclaimed and hurried toward them, praising Second for being so handsome. Second stopped, faced her, and asked whether she was talking about him. The girl pointed straight at him and confirmed that she was. She then introduced herself as Eco Leaflet and asked for his name. Eco Leaflet. Second recognized the name in his thoughts, realizing that she was the one they had been talking about earlier. He told her his name was Second. Eco repeated his name in surprise before peeking from behind him and asking about Sylvia. Sylvia introduced herself politely and said that she was pleased to meet her. Eco happily returned the greeting, grabbing Sylvia's hand and shaking it. Second could not help thinking that such an adorable pet, no, such a seemingly harmless girl, was being bullied. It was outrageous and unforgivable. He then asked Eco whether she was troubled by anything. Eco paused for a moment before answering that she was not really troubled by anything. Second noted in his thoughts that her answer was not really, then told her that if anything troubling ever came up, she should tell him and he would somehow help her out. Eco brightened and eagerly asked whether he really meant it, thanking him excitedly. Second then noticed the pile of things behind her, and asked about all the books. Eco repeated the question before cheerfully explaining that everyone had asked her to bring them. Second understood, realizing that this meant she was a gopher. Second asked whether she could handle all of it alone. Eco proudly assured him that she was fine and quite strong. Second flatly responded that, since he was going out of his way anyway, she should allow him to help her. Eco looked surprised and wondered whether he was sure. Second confirmed that he was, adding that he was going to personally help her out and that such an occurrence was rare, so she should be honored. Eco stared at him for a moment before smiling and thanking him, but she said that she would do it herself. Second wondered why. Eco explained that this sort of thing was all she was good for, so she was trying her best to help everyone. She believed that everyone would treat her kindly once she became much more helpful. Hearing that, Second froze in place, his eyes filling with rage as his fist tightened. He wanted Eco to stop. Eco then waved brightly at them and forcefully pushed the cart full of books forward. As he watched her leave, Second's expression darkened. He thought about those honest and desperate gears of effort that would never connect no matter how much they spun. He remembered the root of that pain. It was pointless. Even if he played online games, they would not result in anything. Even when he tried harder than anyone else and became the world's #1, at the end of the day, it was just an online game. Risking one's life for something like that was nothing but pointless. Yeah, it was pointless. He wondered how pointless and vain his efforts had been, how idiotic, trash, worthless, and hopeless of a human being he was. As he contemplated those things over and over, he eventually died in shame. Then he arrived in this world, which was a total miracle. They called it a blessing from the gods. A totally hopeless guy like him had, for some reason, been miraculously saved. However, he wondered whether a miracle would really happen for Eco as well. He painfully resonated with her feelings. That was exactly why, now that he had realized it, he wanted to save her with these hands of his more than anyone else. Sylvia interrupted his thoughts, causing him to snap back to reality. Later that night, in his room, Second continued wondering whether Eco was really incompetent. Assuming that she was, he could not understand how she could attend the prestigious Royal Academy of Magic despite being incompetent. He was curious. It was an elite academy renowned even in the kingdom, and managing to enroll meant that a person possessed knowledge of magic. Students should be able to use numerous kinds of magic. After pondering over many things throughout the entire night, Second arrived at only one conclusion. He told Sylvia that he thought they should recruit Eco Leaflet. In an instant, Sylvia's face brightened. She expressed that there was nothing more pleasing than having her path aligned with his and his with hers, adding that she was a lucky person. Second quickly cut her off, asking her not to suddenly kneel and act like a knight early in the morning. Sylvia still did not know whether Iko would accept. Second told her that, if Iko did not, he would at least get her to show him her status so that he could give her some advice on what she should take. Sylvia nodded in agreement. However, the commotion in front of them made them stop. It was Iko Leaflet kneeling on the ground while covered in dirt. Both Second's and Sylvia's eyes widened at the scene before them. Sylvia quickly went to Iko, concerned about what was wrong and what had happened. Meanwhile, Second had an extremely bad feeling that something was clearly off. None of the students walking by were reaching out to Iko. They passed straight by, pretending not to see her and ignoring her. He deeply felt an indescribable hostility. Second called out to Iko, asking what was wrong, whether she was okay, and whether she had fallen down. Iko brushed his hand away and shouted that she was fine and that he should not talk to her. Second froze. He knew this. This was the worst of all evils, the scent he had once smelled before, the scent of despair. Iko suddenly sprang to her feet and ran off, desperately trying to get away from them. Sylvia and Second chased after her anyway. As he ran, Second reflected that he did not know exactly what had happened to Iko, but he understood one thing clearly, and Iko had realized it as well. Her efforts were futile. Earlier, Iko had been carrying sacks and stacking them up when one of the nearby men snickered at how she was going out of her way to bring them the mud that was going to be dumped on her. Another remarked that she truly was a dunce. Iko paused with a puzzled expression, and just then, a lump of mud struck her, covering her body in dirt. The men burst into laughter. Iko was forced to hopelessly face a reality she had always turned a blind eye to until now, where nothing would change even if she continued lying to herself about these futile efforts. She could not go on. It was simply too sad to see. Everyone should have dreams. Iko's eyes froze. Meanwhile, Second, who had been following her, decided that they should save her. Iko continued running away. Sylvia finally caught up to her, but Iko slapped her hands away. Second kept chasing after her, following until they finally cornered her. Iko cried out nervously as she stared at them and tried to keep them away. Watching her, Second reflected that at least an hour had passed. Sylvia was finally burned out, but Iko still somehow seemed to have some SP left. Sylvia reassured Iko that everything was all right and that they only wanted to talk. Iko refused and wanted them to go away and leave her alone. Tears suddenly streamed down her face. Seeing that, Second could not help thinking that leaving her alone like this would be even more futile. She was on the losing side. Iko fell silent as Second recalled how she had been running earlier and had shoved Sylvia away so forcefully. He continued analyzing her, noting that Iko was slow but powerful. She had a lot of stamina points, and chances were that she had low sorcery attack power, or INT. He realized it was a gamble, a huge gamble, but it was worth a shot. Second picked up his sword and warned Sylvia not to be startled. As he stepped closer to Iko, she cried out again for him to stay away. Second raised the sword. Sylvia stared at him in shock. Iko was also stunned and confused, unable to understand what Second Dano was doing. Her words stopped abruptly when Second cut off his own arm with the sword without hesitation. Sylvia and Iko froze in horror. Second clenched his teeth as he endured the pain from his severed arm. Sylvia rushed toward him and scolded him for being a fool, but Second ordered her to stay back. Sylvia had no choice but to stop. Second held out the wand in his remaining hand. In his thoughts, he reasoned that if he could recruit Iko to his party here, he would surely move closer to becoming the world's #1. He handed the wand to Iko and told her she was suited for recovery sorcery, then instructed her to use the wand and heal his arm. In his mind, Second concluded that Iko must be a paladin. Iko stared at him speechlessly before shaking her head and crying that she could not do it. The wand in Second's hand was the Recovery Sorcery Wand Med, an extremely rare wand by Holy Slimes that allowed anyone to use the recovery sorcery called Recovery Med as long as they equipped it. If Iko's growth type was Paladin, then the ++ bonus effect limited to healer growth types would activate. It should result in a recovery capacity powerful enough to restore his arm instantaneously. Second looked down at his arm and groaned from the pain, urging Iko to hurry and do it. Iko looked startled but shook her head again in hesitation. Second raised his voice, insisting that there were no excuses and that she could do it. He urged her to hurry. Realizing she had no other choice, Iko accepted the wand and quietly agreed. In his thoughts, Second encouraged her, certain that this was right. She needed to do it. She needed to believe she could help and realize that this was her way out. Without wasting another moment, tears still in her eyes, Iko raised the wand and pointed it toward Second's severed arm. The wand suddenly shone brightly as Iko cried out for it to heal. In the next instant, Second's arm regenerated completely. Second looked down at his arm and murmured that it was back to normal. Iko's knees gave out as she stared at his arm in shock. Just then, Second's body wavered and collapsed to the ground. He faintly apologized for being unable to hold on before losing consciousness. Sylvia rushed to his side in alarm. In his fading thoughts, Second realized that in this world, even if HP or injuries were healed, the body's physical condition did not return to normal quickly. He reflected on Iko's growth type, which he had realized while chasing after her. She was slow, powerful, had a lot of SP, and was a dunce in a magic academy. That meant she had an insanely low INT. They could not imagine her as a sorceress at all, and those factors perfectly matched the traits of a paladin. Because her INT was low, she was not suited for sorcery, and because her DX was too low, she was not suited for archery. Her STR was decent, but her AGI was low, so she could not really maneuver. Even though her INT was low, she had a ton of MP. Looking only at those factors, she seemed completely hopeless. However, some of the high rankers willingly chose this growth type. That was precisely why, whenever a team became famous, it definitely had a paladin as one of its members. Paladins were tanks because they leveraged their high HP, SP, and VIT to utilize shield art. They became walls for their comrades, single-handedly soaking up damage from monsters, and as soon as they suffered damage, they personally used recovery sorcery to restore their own HP. In other words, they could remain standing as a wall until they ran out of MP. If Second could turn a paladin like Iko into a comrade, he could form a team consisting of Paladin Iko, himself as the all-rounder, and the magic archer Sylvia, giving him an advance, middle, and rear guard with complete satisfaction. He would greatly close in on becoming the world's #1 and would be able to aim even higher. Second wanted Iko no matter what. That was what came to his mind. Second was trying to make use of Iko, hoping to get her to become his ally because he was certain she would be useful if she knew recovery sorcery. Thinking back, he realized he had done the same thing with Sylvia before. He had taken advantage of an emptiness in her heart and somewhat forcefully persuaded her. He had gone overboard to attract her sympathy, somehow drawing her toward him and making her join him. Even so, he genuinely wanted her to follow him, and he quietly pleaded for her to do so. Slowly, Second woke up and found himself inside the room. Sylvia rushed to his side in relief, telling him not to go overboard and reminding him that if he lost that hand, he would not be able to become the world's #1. Second called out to Sylvia and explained that it was difficult to say, but it had been his left hand, not that one. Sylvia's face instantly flushed with embarrassment. She quickly let go of his hand and released a heavy sigh before remarking that he had quite the nightmare. Second stayed quiet for a moment before giving a small smile and casually brushing it off as nothing worth worrying about. Sylvia repeated his reassurance that there was no need to worry about him, then pointed out that it should have been her line. She reminded him that both she and Iko had been saved by him, and by no one else. They had been rescued by Second Dano. She had been in a completely hopeless situation, yet Second Dano had saved her from it so easily. Because of that, there was no need for him to worry about anything. She would become his knight and follow him to the ends of the earth. Sylvia smiled softly before leaving the room. Second sat up on his bed, wondering whether she had heard him sleep-talking. But no, he was sure that was not all. Chances were that Sylvia had completely seen through him from the very beginning. Even his attempts to take advantage of her weakness and use her, along with the uneasy feelings he sometimes had about it and everything else, had apparently been seen through by her. Yet she had taken it upon herself to say that she would follow him. She was a good girl. Just then, the door slammed open, startling Second. Someone burst inside while calling his name loudly. Second turned toward the door and saw Iko standing there. She rushed straight to his side and hugged him tightly, repeatedly apologizing. Second gently patted her head and told Iko once again that recovery sorcery was suited for her. He urged her to quit school and join him. In his thoughts, Second recognized this as the best opportunity to ask Iko in order to take advantage of her, and he had faith that it would be her salvation. Iko brightly wondered whether she could be helpful to him. Second smiled and affirmed that she could, deciding that they should travel together. Suddenly, Iko's bright expression fell as she hesitated. Seeing that, Second asked whether there was some reason she could not quit school. Iko looked at him in surprise, wondering how he had known. Second merely grinned and reminded her that he was the world's #1. He then encouraged her to try telling him. Iko clenched her fist tightly as she began explaining. She started telling him everything about herself. From what she told him, it seemed that she had been born in a beastfolk village far away from the royal capital. Iko had possessed a stupidly high amount of MP ever since she was a child, and her father had boasted about it everywhere. The villagers had begun to place their hopes in her, wondering whether Iko might be talented in sorcery after all. The story spread wider and wider until, last year, all the villagers pooled together their gold and enrolled Iko at the prestigious Royal Academy of Magic. She was a prodigy from a countryside beastfolk village, and they foolishly believed that if Iko could become a prominent sorceress, it would help with the village's development. Iko had passed the entrance exam because of her growth type, in which only her INT was abnormally low. She had no problems at all learning skills or improving her knowledge of sorcery. Rather, she was superior at it. She had also already learned the raptor form and the wind and earth element. However, because her INT was abysmally low, her might was not even half that of the other students there. As a result, she was considered a loser. That was why Iko could not quit. She could not betray all of her villagers' expectations. After hearing her story, Second could not help but wonder what those expectations had produced for her. They had only placed a massive weight upon her, weighing down the heart of a lone girl and continuing to crush her even now. Second assured her that everything was all right because he had prepared an escape route for her. Iko gave him a puzzled look. Second explained that she could escape, and that she was lucky to have a good escape route right there. In his thoughts, Second noted that this was different from his time. Iko repeated the idea of having a good escape route, and Second confirmed it, assuring her once again not to worry. He intended to become the world's #1. The world's #1. Iko looked at him, clearly having no idea what he meant by being the world's #1. Second explained that it meant being the best in the world, with not a single person stronger than him, and that she would be one of his team members. There could be nothing more prestigious than that. The Royal Academy of Magic was no more than snot, and becoming a sorceress of the royal court was trivial. Second was certain that the villagers would be pleased too. No, they would be elated after holding a festival for 3 days and 3 nights straight. They would erect a bronze statue of Iko in the dead center of the village and continue spreading tales about her for all eternity. It would be legendary glory. When Iko returned to her village, she would be so eminent that everyone who met her would definitely prostrate themselves and cry before her. Hearing that, Iko could not help but burst into laughter. Second adopted a dramatic tone and imagined Iko-sama returning in glory. That was what the village chief would say first. Her father would probably ask Iko to get Second-sama's autograph for him. Watching Second imitate everyone so seriously, Iko burst into laughter again. Tears welled up in her eyes as she laughed. Seeing that she had finally relaxed, Second smiled quietly. After a moment, Iko called out to him and decided that she would go with him. Second smiled at her answer. And just like that, the paladin beastfolk Iko Leaflet became an ally. Second instructed Iko to withdraw from her studies starting that day and obtain permission to enroll in Class A as his attendant. Iko immediately understood. The 3 of them then went together to the headmaster's office. Paula, the headmaster, asked them to give her a little time. Second agreed and asked how long they should wait. Paula explained that she would hold an emergency staff meeting at lunch and that they would make a decision afterward. Second said he would look forward to good news and took his leave. The 3 of them then exited the office. Once they were outside, Sylvia asked Second why he had done something like that. Second admitted that he did have the feeling he was being unrealistic, but there was a good chance his request would go through. Sylvia wondered why. Second explained that they were exchange students, while he was a noble from a foreign country whose eyes had witnessed bullying, particularly toward beastfolk. Sylvia muttered that she understood, considering that if Zipong was a country that treated beastfolk with hospitality, then this would be seen as a problem. Second finished her thought, explaining that even if they did not consider it a problem, it still gave off an extremely poor impression. Furthermore, the staff were stuck in a situation where they could do nothing even if someone pointed out that they were turning a blind eye to all the bullying. They would not want any more problems to occur, and everyone would want to conclude the matter as amicably as possible. Therefore, it was only natural that his request would pass. Hearing that, Iko gasped in amazement at how smart Second was. With a smug expression, Second attributed it to being the world's #1. Afterward, they headed to the cafeteria. Just then, Maine spotted them and approached Second, having already heard about the matter and realizing that Second was making Iko his attendant. Second furrowed his brow, wondering how Maine already knew. It seemed the rumors had spread in just half a day. Second patted Iko's head and praised her as an excellent recovery sorceress, adding that being unable to see that clearly showed the nature of the school. Maine burst into laughter at his blunt words, remarking that Second Dano was the same as always and expressing his genuine fondness for Second's straightforward personality. At the mention of genuine fondness, Second gave Maine a strange look and began to wonder whether Maine really meant it in that sense. Before he could finish the thought, however, Sylvia smacked him on the back and firmly warned him against it. Iko was left completely confused, while Maine simply watched them with an innocent smile. Just then, Professor Kevin arrived and greeted them. Second immediately asked about the verdict. Kevin informed him that it had been approved without complaint. Iko-san would stay with him in Class A starting that day as Second Dano's attendant. Second expressed his relief at hearing the news. Kevin then excused himself and left. Second thought that Professor Kevin was sharp enough not to ask questions such as why Iko needed to be an attendant or why she was being placed in Class A. If he had asked, Second could have sarcastically bombarded him with an answer about preventing Iko from being bullied again. Sylvia then asked in surprise why Second had put Iko into Class A. Second secretly reminded himself that he had a female knight here who was a numbskull. Iko asked the same question, wondering why. In his thoughts, Second admitted that saying it was to keep her from being bullied again would have been the easy answer, but the truth was different. He had briefly considered taking revenge on the masses who had bullied Iko, but Iko herself had not wanted that. She had simply wanted to be with him. Sylvia and Iko both stared at Second, waiting for an answer. After thinking for a moment, he finally explained that it was because Iko was his comrade. After their meal, they headed to the library. Second noted that they were in the library now and that the remaining exchange student period was limited. He needed to get Sylvia to learn sorcery quickly. 1 week passed. Perhaps his kind, careful, and thorough lectures had borne fruit, because Sylvia acquired the fire element raptor form of sorcery in just 3 days. Moreover, Second thought that Sylvia had grasped some sort of trick. She even exclaimed that she strangely felt as though she could perform the coral form. After that, they ended up borrowing all 4 elements of the coral form from the librarian. Since it was a chance to acquire them, Second decided to acquire all of them as well. Sylvia also seemed to be trying quite hard, repeatedly mumbling that she only needed a little more. She remained planted in her seat, confined to the library as if possessed by something. After that, Second had already taught Sylvia everything she should know, so that period was fairly relaxing. While they were enjoying themselves by lying on the grass, Maine arrived and joined them. That was how they spent the rest of those comfortable days. At a glance, it seemed that Second was not doing much, but the truth was that he had an objective: getting on Maine's good side. He seemed to already be fulfilling that objective, but he still felt that he was not quite there yet. The reason he wanted to get on Maine's side was the 4th form grimoires. Second was certain that Maine had said the 4th form was located inside the royal palace. In the first-rank dungeon Algin, the grimoires for every element of the 4th form each had a roughly 10% drop rate from the boss. It was the simplest dungeon among all the first ranks, and presently, Sylvia, Iko, and Second would have no difficulty exploring Algin dungeon. Thus, he had been trying to get closer to Maine so that they could establish a relationship where Second could ask Maine to bring him to the royal palace. At that moment, Iko held up a document and asked what it was. Second turned toward her and realized belatedly that Iko was not very literate. More precisely, she had trouble with the common Japanese used in this world. Come to think of it, back when he had been in Mabayan, aside from the important NPCs, the beastfolk had spoken in their beastfolk language. That meant Iko had specifically learned Japanese in order to attend this school. Despite the handicap of having to read grimoires while using a dictionary, Iko had surprisingly managed to acquire the raptor form of the wind and earth elements. Since her INT was low, however, she could not use them at all. If anything, although she looked like an idiot, she might actually have been extremely intelligent. Second quickly brushed the thought aside and decided it was probably his imagination. He told Iko to let him see the document. She happily handed it over. Second read the headline, which announced that the 51st Sorcery Convention was accepting entrants. It appeared to be a sorcery convention held every year, and the winner would also receive a prize. Iko asked about the prize. Second scanned the poster and suddenly froze in shock when he saw that the reward was the chase ring. He read it again to make sure. His body began trembling with excitement. He then looked at Iko and declared that they were going to the sorcery convention, his eyes burning with determination. The chase ring, despite its tacky name, was an extremely powerful accessory. Its effect gave the user a 10% chance of performing an extra attack after casting sorcery. In other words, it had a double attack effect. The effect itself was simple, but it provided a hefty blessing. Second noted that anyone who thought the effect was not particularly impressive was mistaken. The truth was that the accessory could be upgraded by 3 levels. If they befriended a high-ranking blacksmith capable of performing ability upgrades on equipment, the chase ring would evolve and provide a monstrous ability. Specifically, after being upgraded by 3 levels, the chance of an extra attack would rise from 10% to 25%. However, there was no way an item with such a powerful hidden ability could be common. During the Mabayan days, it cost 1.5 billion CL. In this world, Second had no idea exactly how much it would cost. Regardless, he had to get his hands on it here, no matter what means he had to use. Fortunately, the sorcery convention would begin on the last day of their exchange program. As a foreigner who found grimoires rather curious, Second knew that some people would become awfully suspicious of him once he went all out using the raptor and coral forms. Still, as long as they quickly turned tail and ran, they would be able to manage. When the day before the sorcery convention arrived, Second asked Maine whether he was going to attend. Maine explained that, as the second prince, he had to participate and then asked whether Second-san was going to attend as well. Second confirmed that he was, causing Sylvia to burst her drink out of her mouth in surprise. She immediately pointed out that she had never heard about that. Second remarked on her reaction and explained that it was because he had never mentioned it. Maine sighed heavily. Seeing that, Second asked whether there was something he disliked about the sorcery convention. Main explained that his older brother would be there the following day. Second narrowed his eyes at Main and realized that he meant the first prince. He bluntly wondered whether Main disliked him. Main quickly clarified that this was not what he meant. He simply was not very good with his brother. His older brother was a talent supremacist, and because Main only had talent in sorcery, his older brother, whose forte was swordsmanship, called him a weakling and looked down on him immensely. Furthermore, even without intending to, his older brother saw them as rivals fighting for the crown and therefore considered Main a threat. Although his brother was visiting the following day to spectate as the commander of the First Chivalric Order, Main was certain that his brother's real motive was to denounce him in front of the masses. Hearing that, Second realized that the first prince was the commander of the First Chivalric Order. The first prince certainly sounded like a bad person. Second glanced at Sylvia, who was sitting in silence. He understood now. That first prince was one of the corrupt scumbags from the upper echelons of the chivalric order who had harassed Sylvia. That would mean the first prince was the highest among them. Second then asked Main whether he could simply skip the sorcery convention by pretending to be sick or something. Main shook his head and explained that his older brother would simply use his absence to portray him as a weak and stupid younger brother who, despite attending an academy of magic, was too cowardly to even show up at a sorcery convention. Second could not help thinking that being a prince was painful. Sylvia suddenly brought up another matter and addressed Second Dano. Second asked what was wrong. Sylvia informed him that she had acquired the Coeurl form that morning. Second was surprised that she had acquired it that morning and that he had never heard about it. Sylvia smirked and explained that she had never mentioned it. Second was taken aback, realizing that she had thrown his own words back at him. Meanwhile, Iko remained busy eating her food. On the day of the sorcery convention, Second sat in his seat with a serious expression. A man nearby remarked that although there was a ring prize, he had never heard of it before. Another pointed out that the previous year had marked its 50th anniversary, yet it did not seem like a big deal. Another added that the number of participants had been decreasing and the rules had been revised, so the convention was declining. While listening to them, Second could not help thinking that although these men were aspiring sorcerers, they did not know the worth of the chase ring. Without any upgrades, it was understandable to think that a 10% chance of an extra attack was insignificant, but there was no way they would not know about ability upgrades. One of the men mentioned that he had heard His Highness Klaus would spectate that year. Another smirked and considered it obvious, given that Class A was participating. The first man understood that he meant the second prince. He then added that there were rumors that the two princes were not on good terms. Someone wondered how that had happened. Another brought up the first prince beating the second prince while calling it an exhibition. A third man burst into laughter and considered the first prince rather cool. Hearing that, Second thought that no matter where they went in this academy, the image of the first prince versus the second prince was always being painted. It was rather unnatural, and he could not imagine that the main reason lay with Main himself. There was a huge possibility that the first prince was manipulating their reputation. Second wondered whether this Klaus guy hated Main that much. Just then, Main arrived, causing the men from earlier to immediately shut their mouth. Main approached Second, who asked whether he was going to be a seed. Main's face lit up when he spotted Second and he confirmed that he was going to start in the semifinals. Second realized that meant he would not encounter Main until the finals. Main chuckled and looked forward to meeting Second there. The sorcery convention was being held in a tournament format with a total of 7 participants. Main was positioned at the left end while Second was at the right. Main only needed to win once to reach the finals, whereas Second needed to win twice. There was, however, one thing Second did not know. He called out to Main and asked what they did in a sorcery convention. The men nearby collapsed from their seats upon hearing the question. Main was shocked that Second had signed up without knowing something like that. Second casually apologized and guessed that they were probably killing each other using sorcery. Main immediately rejected the idea. Second then guessed that they were killing each other normally instead. Main reacted even more strongly, pointing out that such a competition was supposed to involve sorcery. Main sighed deeply and explained that the sorcery convention was conducted with a competition crown, so it had nothing to do with taking lives. The competition crown was primarily used in PvP and was a useful item that allowed participants to engage in PvP with absolutely no risk. The usage and skill limitations of every piece of equipment and other such matters had rules established for them in detail. There was no risk because everything that happened inside a competition using a competition crown was virtual. The participants' own HP and MP were virtualized, and the damage they dealt and received was virtual as well. Originally, in a PvP duel using a dual crown, the battle was conducted in reality with both parties' flesh and blood, so people naturally died when their HP reached 0. With a competition crown, however, everything was virtual. Even if a participant's HP reached 0, The competition simply ended and everything returned to normal without any issues. Because of that, players had called it something meant for chickens. However, some curious gamers had been fascinated by the freedom provided by the rules established by the competition crown. They explored all kinds of variations, invented interesting competitions that were completely different from typical duels, and popularized them. For this particular competition, Main explained that the attacks had to be performed with sorcery. That was the sole rule this time. He made sure Second understood. After hearing Main's explanation, Second became confident about the situation. In his thoughts, he concluded that it was a shitty-ass game. Moments later, Second's time to fight arrived. A man stood at the center and announced the third match between first-year Class A's Second and first-year Class F's Dean. Second stared at his opponent. Just then, Iko's loud cheering reached his ears. Iko waved her hands and accidentally hit Sylvia. Iko turned toward Sylvia, completely unaware of what she had done. The referee then announced the activation of the competition crown. The stage contained a circle with a radius of 50 meters that served as their competition arena. Leaving the arena would result in defeat. The referee raised his hand and declared the two participants ready, beginning the match. The referee declared the start of the battle. Dean, who was Second's opponent, immediately began casting a spell while Second remained standing calmly. From the color and formation of the sorcery, Second could tell that Dean was using the raptor form of wind. Second considered him an idiot. The Opio form was an ordinary attack, the raptor form was a spread strike, the coral form was a powerful solo strike, the fourth form was a powerful spread strike, and the fifth form was an extremely powerful spread strike. Their respective cast times grew longer in that order. Opio, coral, raptor, fourth, and fifth. If a specific attack struck them during casting, the casting would be broken. Therefore, in a competition, sorcery with a cast time of the raptor form or longer was pointless. This was common sense. Second wondered whether Dean Kuan was trying to fool around with him like that. Perhaps Dean had heard some rumor somewhere that Second could not even use sorcery decently. Second felt irritated at the thought that this punk had really made light of the world's number one. He smirked and told Dean to prepare himself. Then he stepped forward, raised his hand and cast the Opio form of wind. The wind slowly formed around his hand. At the same moment, Dean cast the raptor form of wind. Wind also began to gather around Dean's hand, but while it was still forming, Second's wind attack struck Dean's spell and caused it to vanish into thin air. Second smirked as he considered the particular trait that occurred when sorcery and sorcery collided. It was a defensive technique that took advantage of that trait to cancel an opponent's attack. The user would take a little damage, but the cooldown after the Opio form compared to the cooldown after the raptor form was at least twice as long, creating an advantage that more than made up for the difference in power. Dean gasped in shock. Second gave Dean the choice between being tortured to death like that or dying shamelessly while begging for his life. At that same moment, Second cast the coral form of fire. Instantly, flames gathered in his hand. Second had the skill at 5th class, so the cast time reduction had been raised by 2 stages, and the attack power was 300% of his converted ante value. Dean broke into a cold sweat and cried out that he was done for. Just then, Second's flame attack shot toward him. Dean watched it nervously, and the moment it hit him, a huge explosion erupted, blasting Dean into the air. His scream echoed across the arena before he crashed down onto the ground. Second cursed inwardly, realizing that he had put in too much power. He had planned to leave about 10% of Dean's HP so that he could toy with him, but the referee who witnessed the scene was stunned, but after finding his voice, he finally announced that the winner was Second. After the competition finished, the grounds returned to normal as if nothing had happened. Second glanced at Dean, who looked at him with horror and had apparently peed himself in fear. Second then turned to his companions and casually indicated that he had won. Iko exclaimed that Second was so strong. Second responded that of course he was, dear eccentric. Sylvia worried that he was overdoing it and asked whether Dean would be okay. Second assured her that it was no big deal, since he would eventually become the world's number one anyway. Besides, they would bid farewell that day because they were going to escape as soon as they snatched the prize. Sylvia understood that, but she still asked him not to overdo it. Second answered that he understood and asked Sylvia whether she thought she was his mom or something. Sylvia repeated the word in shock, still dumbfounded by the thought of being his mom. Iko encouraged Second to do his best, and he agreed. Meanwhile, Sylvia remained stunned, still mumbling about being his mom. Right then, the next match was announced. The referee called out that the second semi-final match was between first-year Class A, Second, and fourth-year Class A, Keith. The winner of this round would advance to the finals to face Main. The referee instructed them to be ready and begin. At once, Keith lunged toward him while Second stood calmly, thinking that this guy was pretty knowledgeable. In a competition that used only sorcery between intermediate students, the outcome was practically decided by who made the first move. If that was the case, fighting primarily with the Opio form, which naturally had the fastest cast time, was the intelligent choice. Immediately, Second cast the Opio form of wind. Keith instantly stopped and did the same. Winds gathered in their hands, and they launched them at each other. Second realized that it would now become a never-ending stalemate. After this, they would simply cast sorcery together, but the spells cast at almost the same time would collide and cancel each other out, returning them to the beginning. This was the flaw in the competition's rules, and one of the reasons he had concluded that this was a shitty-ass game. Second sighed. Certainly, if this had been a match between beginners, reaching a stalemate like this would have been impressive. However, unfortunately for Keith, his opponent was the former world's #1. Keith asked Second to surrender and offered to give him a suitable reward. Second was slightly surprised and asked why. Keith explained that he could not allow Second and His Highness Mane to fight. When Second questioned him again, Keith explained that he intended to have His Highness Mane win, after which Mane would have a friendly competition with His Highness Klaus. Second questioned Keith about why he was telling him something like that. Keith responded that Second did not deserve it and should simply lose. Second then asked whether it was because he would defeat both Mane and the first prince. Keith denied this and explained that only a competition between His Highness Klaus and His Highness Mane would have meaning. Second stared sharply at him, understanding that Keith was bringing politics onto the competition grounds. Keith insisted that they would never reach a resolution at this rate. Second narrowed his eyes, thinking that this Keith fellow seemed to have been hired to help Mane reach the finals. He must have been one of Klaus's underlings. Under the guise of a friendly competition, Klaus would beat Mane up in front of the spectators. The rumors in the waiting room were not necessarily wrong after all. Second was not pleased. What displeased him most was that Keith was trying to negotiate with him during a stalemate like this and had gotten the foolish idea that he could make Second give up. Second asked Keith whether he thought things would go that smoothly. Keith gritted his teeth and shouted that it was futile. At that moment, their wind attacks collided again. Second immediately cast the Opio form of fire, while Keith did the same. Second thought that Keith was rather skilled at countering him, and they certainly would not reach a resolution in this situation. In this situation, at least. A smirk spread across Second's lips. Since this was a good opportunity, he decided to show them all the real deal. Keith gasped and exclaimed in shock. Second summoned his longbow. They must have been wondering how he could do that inside a sorcery-only competition. However, it was already too late. Second told Sylvia to watch carefully. Sylvia watched in surprise as Second released an arrow wrapped in massive flames. Magic archery was another excellent attack that used sorcery, and it was the second reason why this was a shitty game. Magic archery knocked sorcery onto the bow instead, so it did not actually use any arrow. Keith gritted his teeth, unable to find time to dodge the incoming attack. Just like that, the flames engulfed him. Slowly, the fire faded away, and Keith staggered from the damage before quickly stepping back. Second asked whether this was the first prince's goal. Keith was stunned. Seeing that reaction, Second realized that a competition where the only means of attack was sorcery was clearly a shitty game. That was precisely why stalemates could occur. Prince Klaus must have had some sort of technique to break through them. Second was pretty sure Noir-san had said that Noir specialized in swordsmanship. Chances were that Prince Klaus was using magic swordsmanship. As long as Prince Klaus had that trump card in the competition, Prince Klaus would never lose to Mane. Second was sure that Prince Klaus could poke Mane full of holes without any retaliation, just like this competition he was in now. Second remarked that such cowardly tactics should be experienced firsthand so they could realize how foolish they were. He drew the string of his longbow again and cast another spell into it instead of an arrow. In his mind, he organized the combination. First, he would secure the target with Knight Archery, raise their strength with Silver General Archery, and boost the impact with the Coral form of Earth. This was a combination of 3 skills. Second considered how cowardly it was and how they should experience firsthand how foolish such an act was. While Second was casting the spell, Keith immediately decided to run away. Second warned him that running was futile. He released the string and shot it at Keith. Stones of earth struck Keith's body and knocked him down instantly. The referee stood stunned for a moment but quickly recovered and announced that the winner was Second. Meanwhile, the audience stared with wide eyes before suddenly standing up and cheering loudly. Second smiled as he watched the crowd cheering for him. Away from the eyes of the people, Keith apologized to Klaus. Klaus responded that it was fine and that he would need to change his plans now, but it seemed he had found himself a rather pretty gem. Klaus added that chances were that the so-called Second would win. If he could recruit Second, that little brother of his would still be in a predicament. Keith replied that the man was a rather powerful enemy. Klaus questioned whether that man could refuse an invitation from him, the first chivalric order's commander. There was no such possibility. Klaus grinned and added that it was remarkable that an Academy of Magic had someone capable of making combinations of sorcery hiding within it, and he was glad he had attended. That man would serve as an excellent pawn. Keith remained silent. Meanwhile, at the arena, the referee announced that they would now be entering the finals. Main entered the arena and commented on how truly powerful Second was, adding that he had somehow had that sort of hunch. Second confirmed it and apologized for hiding it, then questioned whether Main had his scorn now. Main smiled brightly and replied that there was no way, as he had come to like Second even more. Second told him that, in that case, Main should take him to the royal palace next time because he wanted to read the fourth form. Main agreed, then hesitantly added that he wanted Second to come in exchange. The referee interrupted and announced for the two of them to get ready and begin. Immediately, Main's face turned serious. Second and Main cast the Opio form of wind at the same time. Second considered that it was obvious, but he would not be using magic archery. It would be rude to bend the rules like that against an opponent who could use nothing but sorcery, and besides, it was no fun anyway. Main sharpened his eyes and waited for the right time to launch his attack. Second expected Main to cancel the spell once again and bring them back to square one, but his expectation was immediately defied. Second's eyes widened slightly as he watched Main cancel his own spell cast. A strong wind wrapped around Main when Second's attack struck him. Second realized that Main had forcefully twisted his cast time. Just then, Main cast another spell. Second reflected that while being attacked during casting would interrupt the casting, starting to cast in the midst of being attacked instead would not cause an interruption. Main cast the choral form of wind, and Second immediately countered it. A massive flash burst between them. Second's skill rank was higher than Main's, which meant his cast time was shorter as well. Because of that, even though he cast later, both Main's and his choral forms were invoked at the same time and cancelled each other out. After both attacks vanished into thin air, Main stood there dumbfounded. Second looked at him and realized that this was a look that should never be shown in a PvP. It completely revealed that his trump card had just been used. Second stepped back and reflected that he had made light of Main. He preached to others about never underestimating people, yet he had ended up doing so himself. Main was serious, and if Main came at him seriously, then it was only respectful for Second to do the same. Second decided to execute the ultimate sorcery in Mobius Online with the dignity of the man who had defended the title of Wise General 22 times in a row. He told Main to watch carefully, then cast the choral form of fire. At the same time, Main cast the choral form of wind and shouted that Second shall not pass. Second shot his flames toward Main while recognizing that the attack was just outside its effective range at that distance. That feeling had been ingrained in him through many years of experience, and he did not even need to measure to know. Besides, he had not exactly prepared the choral form as an offensive attack to begin with. Main was stunned when he saw that the flame did not hit him and instead stopped in front of him. Then he noticed Second already moving into his next action. Main's eyes widened in shock as he realized that he could not see any magic circle. Second told him that he could use it like this as well. Second reflected that sorcery was not always offensive and could also be used in this way to hide the next move. For that next move, the raptor form was a spread strike skill with a long cast time, but the effect they could invoke from it was no joke. Main quickly became alarmed when he saw Second casting again. Second commanded the spell to invoke. In an instant, large stones burst from the ground in front of Main, blocking him completely. Main's jaw dropped wide. Second reflected that calling forth a wall to limit his opponent's freedom was also a respectable sorcery tactic. It was the most basic of the basics in a battle of sorcery, and they had nothing to lose by learning it. Now it was time for his finisher. Right away, Second cast the choral form of water. At that instant, unable to dodge it, Main's eyes widened as the attack struck him and knocked him down to the ground. Main sighed disappointedly, but when he felt a presence approaching him, he lifted his head and saw Second. After a short laugh, he admitted that he had lost. Hearing that, Second's face darkened. Meanwhile, the crowd cheered loudly. Second glared at Main and harshly demanded to know why the fuck he was laughing. Main froze, stunned by Second's words. Stunned, Main replied that Second-san was powerful. Second denied this, explaining that if Main's choral form had been at least of the 5th class, he probably would have lost. By constantly being at the brink of defeat, Second had unknowingly made light of Main, and there was not a hint of power in that. Main questioned whether Second really was not powerful. Second's face darkened even more as he angrily demanded whether Main was pissed off. Main had lost to somebody who had looked down on him, so he should be pissed off. Main lowered his eyes and replied that he was not. Second told him not to lie to himself, warning that if Main did not get pissed off there, he would remain that way for the rest of his life. Main fell silent, thinking of the words he should use. Just then, Prince Klaus arrived. He applauded Second and remarked that his perception had been magnificent, adding that it was as they said. His stupid younger brother lacked that spirit, despite Klaus repeatedly telling his younger brother that time and time again. Second glanced at him. Prince Klaus continued by saying that he had caught a glimpse of Second's abilities and found him truly skillful. He was therefore granting Second special permission to join his ranks and study leadership with him. The audience was shocked upon hearing the offer. Meanwhile, Second considered that being under the direct supervision of Klaus, the first prince, would mean securing a position in the upper echelon of the first chivalric order. In addition, when Klaus was crowned the new king, he would be guaranteed an even greater promotion. It was an unbelievable situation, and Second was fully aware of it. However, refusing the invitation would mean declaring to the masses that he was making an enemy out of Klaus, the first prince. There was no way he could refuse. That was what everyone would think, at least for a normal person. Second gave the prince a firm answer by refusing. Everyone was shocked at Second's bold decline of the offer. Prince Klaus gritted his teeth and demanded clarification, but Second repeated that he refused. Prince Klaus's face twisted in anger. Meanwhile, Second considered that it was fine because he had already predicted this. Klaus could no longer beat the crap out of Maine because of him, so Second had figured Klaus would eventually come to him like this and try to recruit him. After all, Klaus was the big boss of that dubious chivalric order. Prince Klaus threateningly demanded whether Second did not want to accept. Second explained that he had made a promise with Maine prior to the match and would go with him to the royal palace afterward. Maine was surprised. Second understood the meaning behind those words. They stated that he was already affiliated with the second prince. He had certainly formed an arrangement with Maine just a few minutes ago, and the referee nearby could serve as a witness to that. Prince Klaus glanced darkly at the referee and firmly asked whether it was true. The referee nervously nodded in response. Prince Klaus gritted his teeth and accepted that a contract had already been made between Maine and Second. Cutting in and soliciting was essentially a public act of attempted headhunting, and even though Klaus was the first prince, doing so was a breach of etiquette. With a tone filled with rage, Prince Klaus said that it was truly unfortunate and that Second should therefore show his devotion to Maine from then on. With that, Prince Klaus immediately left. Maine then called out to Second with his eyes sparkling with admiration. Second considered that Maine was completely forgetting about the lesson he had been teaching him up until then. He decided it was time to continue the lesson and asked whether Maine could keep competing with him until Maine finally got pissed off. Maine gasped in surprise and pleaded for some leniency, insisting that there was no way he could beat Second. Second called him a fool and explained that this was precisely the part of Maine that had to change. That was why Prince Klaus had called Maine his weak-ass, stupid little brother. Maine complained that it was mean and remarked that Second-san was extremely strict with him, practically like his older brother. Second told him not to bunch them together. He gently tapped Maine's head with his fist and added that it was because they were friends, dumbass. Immediately, tears welled up in Maine's eyes. He then smiled brightly and agreed. Meanwhile, on the way to the headmaster's office, Prince Klaus angrily shouted in frustration over that damned Maine. He slammed the door open and called for Paula Memento, demanding to know whether she was there. The headmaster, Paula, stood up and asked His Highness Klaus to calm down. Klaus angrily ordered her to be quiet and demanded that she quickly give him all their information on that sickening wretch named Second. Paula immediately rummaged through her drawer. Klaus demanded that she hand it over, then quickly snatched the document from Paula's hand and scanned the information inside it. He gasped again in anger upon seeing that it was all the information available, questioning whether it only described how Second had spent his time in the academy. Paula explained that Second was a man of rather many mysteries. Even the island nation of Zippong, where he had been born, remained an absolute unknown. Prince Klaus's face contorted with anger. He cursed in frustration, threw the documents aside, and stormed out of the office. Paula was left standing silently. She then picked up the documents that had fallen onto the floor, murmuring that she had heard Prince Klaus was hot-tempered. She supposed that, although, Second Cohen would require her to look deeper into him then. At the start of Chapter 16, after receiving the chase ring as Second's prize for winning, they fled and left the Royal Academy of Magic. With that, Second's sorcery acquisition plan was accomplished for the time being. Second then announced his current objective to the ladies. For the time being, they would focus on gaining experience points in dungeons and continue exploring until Eco, in particular, reached intermediate level. Second figured that, given their current situation, raising the level of their skills should come first above all else. Starting that day, they would concentrate their efforts on exploring dungeons for the next little while. Sylvia asked whether they were going to Royce's dungeon again, and Eco became excited. Second explained that they would not be going to Royce's dungeon this time. Instead, they were going to explore a second-rank dungeon, Limped Fath. Sylvia considered it, while Eco accepted the plan. Second explained that the Limped Fath dungeon did not spawn many monsters, and all of them featured high defense but low offense. It would be good training for their coordination. In addition, its boss, the Rock Tortoise, dropped the Rock Shell Shield, making it perfect for Eco to equip. Sylvia asked Second to explain more about the shield he had mentioned for Eco. Second explained that Eco was suited for the duty of fending off monster attacks on the front lines. He patted Eco's hair and asked whether they should go and improve Eco's shield arts that day. Iko agreed. Sylvia tried to stop Second, but he simply explained that there would be times when Iko would be hurt even if she defended with a shield. To prepare for those moments, they would acquire some recovery sorcery as well. Iko agreed. Sylvia questioned whether Second really planned to have such an innocent young girl stand on the front lines. Second reassured her that it was fine and that Iko would become indomitable in no time. Sylvia clarified that this was not what she meant, but Second proceeded with the plan. They went to the armor store and bought a large shield that was as tall as Iko. There was no armor suitable for Iko's body, so they bought some high-class lesser equipment instead. The entire set came to 4 million CL, which was even more expensive than Second's own gear. Afterward, they stopped by the Grand Royal Library, where Second had Iko learn pawn shield art and spear shield. Second then took Iko to the church to look at the recovery sorcery grimoires. At the church, Second asked to look at the recovery minor grimoire for recovery sorcery. The nun led the way and showed them a book. Iko later read the book and acquired the skill of recovery sorcery, recovery minor. Second then decided that they should leave. Afterward, as they rode horses, Second considered that a 4-hour trip on horseback from the royal capital, followed by another 30 minutes past the farming town Piho, would bring them to Limped Fath Dungeon. They arrived at the farming town Piho, and soon after, the next day, they began exploring the Limped Fath Dungeon. For the first 2 to 3 weeks, they advanced at their own leisure, focusing on Iko's acquisition of shield art skills. Iko easily acquired the shield art skills Second wanted her to learn to start with the exception of bishop shield art among the 5. The 5 were pawn, spear, knight, gold general, and bishop shield arts. Their effects were as follows. Pawn shield art provided standard protection. Spear shield art performed reflect piercing. Knight shield art protected and knocked back. Gold general shield art provided area protection as well as knockback. Several days passed after that, and around their 10th run, Iko began to clearly distinguish herself as a paladin. At present, Iko was using a shield against a beast that had just attacked. Sylvia shouted in concern, asking whether Iko was all right. Iko herself was surprised, while Sylvia remained confused. Second explained that it was thanks to Iko's shield art. It seemed that Iko's HP and VIT had risen considerably. Sylvia remained concerned by the development. In Second's mind, Iko was gradually growing into a promising tank, and he guessed that it was time for bishop shield art. Iko turned toward him with a questioning look. Thinking that it was the right time, they progressed toward the boss located at the deepest point of the dungeon. The boss of Limped Fath Dungeon was a massive tortoise monster called Rock Tortoise. It boasted high defense, but it did not have much power. Second explained to Iko that she should cast her skills according to his lead to protect them. Even if they did not make a mistake, it would still take around 15 minutes to defeat it, and if they made a mistake, they would have to do it all over again. He asked Iko whether she could handle it, and Iko confirmed that she could. Iko then walked forward. Second signaled the beginning, and Iko stood in front of the boss. In Second's mind, the condition for acquiring Bishop's shield art was to utilize shield arts to completely block 100 attacks in a row from a boss that was stronger than them. The main bottleneck was the complete part. This basically meant that Iko could not take even a single point of damage, so her means of defending would be limited. She would repel long-range pierce strikes with spear shards. This meant that Iko could not attack with shield arts or keep parrying and knocking the rock tortoise back with knight shield art or gold general shield art. Parrying was a phenomenon that triggered when someone synchronized with an enemy's attack and defended at the right timing, protecting that person from damage while adding a weak knockback effect. Now that it had come to this, it was essentially a music game, and mastering it was a pain. However, as long as they learned the timing, they would be able to constantly parry to defend, making it possible to battle with an insane advantage. Second coached Iko through the attacks with knight, gold general, knight, and spear, guiding her in tune with the rock tortoise's attacks. The rock tortoise attacked relatively simply and casually, but nonetheless, getting the parry timing right at first sight was difficult. Iko was hit. Second and Sylvia were shocked. Second realized that they had been just a bit too slow and asked Iko whether she could get going. Iko turned toward him and confirmed that she could. Iko then used her recovery minor skills. She stepped forward and stood in front of the boss. The boss roared and Iko stared at it. From that point on, they continued facing off against the rock tortoise for almost 2 hours. Eventually, Iko acquired Bishop's shield art. At the start of Chapter 29, Sylvia and Iko were demonstrating outside. Sylvia pulled her string and fired at Iko's shield, but Iko stood firm and blocked the attack with her shield. The people watching were surprised. Iko raised her hand, leaving one of the spectators amazed at the possibility that they might be able to conquer Proline. Another spectator reflected that a bow of flames and an impregnable shield could allow them to venture several times a day. Shinsei announced that the final demonstration was next and that Second could proceed. Second walked into the midst of the area and raised a ticket. The ticket began to glow, and a magic circle appeared beneath his feet. The people wondered what was happening. The sky darkened, and streaks of lightning appeared across it. Looking upward, the spectators wondered whether Second was manipulating the weather. Second stood there and looked up. He was somewhat confused as he realized that this was not the ordinary summoning scene. Then he remembered that after any massive update in Mabian Online, the very first time a player summoned a spirit with a spirit strength of at least 35,000, they would receive a one-of-a-kind spirit. Mabian had gone through 29 massive updates in the past, so naturally, only 29 people possessed such spirit. Among all of them, one was the most powerful and rarest, possessing an initial spirit strength of 41,000. The people were shocked as the sky appeared to morph. Smoke erupted from the sky until a hand emerged from it. The hand was gigantic, and when it touched the ground, the earth cracked. The people braced themselves. A sphere-like object appeared in front of Second, causing his eyes to widen. A man appeared. His name was Engalmois, the great ruler of all spirits that governed the four elements. Engalmois grinned at Second before kneeling before him, having awaited the day he could meet Second in this manner. The people were terrified when they saw that Engalmois was a demon. They were shocked that Second had summoned a demon. Second recognized that the people had a point. Every bit of Engalmois reeked of evil, and having such a ruler of evil kneel before him could only lead to such a reaction. Second could not understand why he had obtained this particular spirit at a moment like this. The likelihood of scoring a spirit strength of 35,000 or higher was only 0.1%, and he would have been perfectly satisfied with a spirit possessing 35,000. Second apologized to Engalmois and informed him that they would speak next time, but for now, he would be sending Engalmois back. Engalmois would have to come out normally the next time. Engalmois wondered whether Second was displeased and asked for forgiveness, having simply been somewhat enthusiastic about his initial summon. Second bid Engalmois farewell and sent him back. Engalmois was shocked as he began to disappear. Second scratched his head, wondering how he could have explained the situation. It was only natural, but their negotiations had completely washed away as if they had never happened. After all, both the merchant and blacksmithing guilds had fled in a frenzy, claiming that Second must never associate with Engalmois. Yet Second had managed to pull Engalmois. Engalmois was the great ruler of the spirits who stood above all other spirits that ruled over the four elements, and as a result, his introduction was also extremely unique. Even though Second had been the world's #1 in his past life, Engalmois was such a rare spirit that nobody had ever owned him before. For Second's goal of becoming the world's #1 once again, this should have been a truly delightful situation. However, due to certain circumstances, Second could not honestly be happy about it. Yukari apologized. Second wondered why she was apologizing. If he had to say, he was the one filled with remorse right now. Yukari explained that she had miscalculated and that it had been meaningless for a commoner like her to make Second consider that idea. Instead, it might have become a shackle on her master. Second questioned what she meant by a shackle. Yukari explained that Second was transcendental, whether he made enemies out of a guild or earned their confidence. From this incident, she had truly learned that worrying about such things and setting up petty schemes was unnecessary. Second wondered why she thought that. Yukari explained that, given her master's peculiarly carefree attitude, Second must not believe that any failure was truly a failure. Second disagreed, admitting that he did consider this a failure and, if he had to describe it, it was definitely an epic failure. Yukari did not believe that was the case. She reasoned that a true failure for a human being would not be someone who still ate dinner on time, enjoyed a little wine after leaving the bath, and smiled while saying farewell to others for the day. Second thought about her words. Yukari remained certain that Second did not consider this incident a significant failure. On the contrary, from the very beginning, he must have thought that it did not even matter if he failed. She wondered whether she was correct. In Second's mind, what Yukari had said before was of no importance, but what she said afterward was exactly as she described it. After all, Yukari's motive was to save money to buy a home. Even if Second were to fail, it would not truly lead him away from his goal of becoming the world's #1. Certainly, Second did not think of the incident as a failure. It was exactly as Yukari had said. Second praised Yukari for seemingly knowing Saken better than he knew himself. Yukari denied that there was anything like that. Silence followed. Yukari apologized and explained that if she had understood her master better, even during this incident, she might have been able to work out a better plan. Saiken told her that this was exactly why she should not worry about it. Although Saiken was not familiar with Yukari, he had been counting on her for everything after all. Yukari reasoned that she had taken responsibility and failed. Saiken explained that this was precisely why he considered it his failure. Yukari could not possibly have predicted that such a thing would happen. There was nothing for her to fret over. Saken had been the one who made the decision, and therefore the responsibility belonged entirely to him. Yukari fell silent again. Saiken encouraged her, explaining that this time things simply had not worked out very well by coincidence, and he was sure everything would be fine next time. He also expressed his expectation that Yukari would work out a plan with him. After a pause, Yukari agreed. Second added that, in that case, he hoped he could continue counting on Yukari from then on. Yukari agreed again, though she looked worried and began to stutter. Yukari then managed to explain that from that point onward, she would need to know more about Saken. She needed to know everything about him. Second was glad. Yukari walked toward him and parted her lips. Second's eyes widened as he asked whether he could be with her that night. At the beginning of chapter 30, Yukari closed the distance between them, but a sudden knock interrupted the moment. The knocking grew louder, irritating Yukari and making Second nervous. He allowed the person outside to enter, and a man appeared. The man apologized for visiting so late at night before asking whether the person in front of him was Second. After Second confirmed his identity, the man introduced himself as Forrest, a steward serving the lumberjack family. He had been ordered by their master to come, as the family wished to discuss an important matter with Second. Second considered the names of the lumberjack family and its steward. Yukari quietly explained that they were an earldom governing the commercial town of Regnard, and that the personal appearance of their house steward was a display of professional courtesy. Second finally understood. A steward was essentially a butler, while there was also a house and an entire family involved. The whole arrangement seemed complicated. What concerned him more was why the steward of such an earldom had come so late at night. Yukari quietly suggested that Forrest had probably come in secret. Second wondered whether Yukari was some kind of psychic, since she understood what he was thinking so well. Second asked Forrest about the reason for his visit. Forrest explained that he had come with a proposition concerning their mithril alloy business. Second became curious about the matter. Perhaps they had become interested after witnessing such an act, or perhaps there was some ulterior motive behind their interest. Forrest confirmed that possibility by explaining that the Earl had stated his desire to request the wholesale of mithril alloy from Second without fail. Second found it incredibly suspicious, although the proposal itself sounded appealing. He looked toward Yukari and noticed that she seemed tempted as well. Yukari likely felt that an opportunity to recover had finally presented itself. Second decided to rely on her to handle the matter, and Yukari, surprised at first, accepted with full determination and took responsibility for everything. That night, Yukari and Forrest continued their discussion. Yukari informed Second that, for their plans to proceed, they would need to meet with the Earl at least once. Second left all planning for the matter in her hands. Yukari understood and immediately began devising a schedule with the goal of making the utmost use of their available time. To confirm the schedule, they would meet the visiting Earl in Ball the following day, and then proceed to dinner. The next morning, they would travel to the commercial town of Regnard together with the Earl. That afternoon, they would hold a meeting to discuss the details, followed in the evening by a banquet with the Earl family. The following morning, they would hold yet another meeting before finalizing the contract shortly after afternoon. Second was impressed by how superbly Yukari had arranged everything in the blink of an eye. The schedule was perfect for him, though he wondered whether the Earl would be willing to follow it. Forrest then confirmed that the Earl would come again the following evening as scheduled to escort Second. With that, the door shut. Second wondered whether there was any possibility that the entire arrangement was a trap. Yukari could not deny that possibility, but she believed the likelihood was extremely low. The Earl had promptly freed 3 days of his schedule to meet them. Moreover, he had sent his own steward to greet them in order to ensure the success of the arrangement. It seemed as though the Earl intended to make the deal work at any cost. Second considered that, among all those who served the Earl, the steward was the person closest to him. From a diplomatic perspective, sending the steward personally was therefore the most meaningful greeting the Earl could offer. The situation somewhat reeked of trouble, but it did not seem like a trap. Second did, however, suspect that Yukari would be quite busy for a while. Despite everything that had been said, Second asked Yukari to handle everything for him. Yukari accepted and assured him that she would take care of it all, making certain that the matter was settled in the way he desired. Second acknowledged that the arrangement sounded promising, but clarified that it was not what he meant. His real concern was whether handling everything would become a burden for Yukari. As he looked at her, she appeared surprisingly puzzled, leaving him uncertain about what she was feeling. Yukari was already handling blacksmithing, taking care of Second's daily needs, and fulfilling her secretarial duties. If it were Second in her position, he would also have to conduct business on top of all that. He felt that he would downright collapse from being overworked. Yukari explained that she was doing all of this because she wanted to. As far as she was concerned, it was no big deal. In her opinion, aiming to become the world's #1 was far more difficult. Second wondered whether she truly thought so. Yukari added that, unlike assassination, this work felt worthwhile to her. Second smiled. Second then reminded Yukari that it would be coming out again the following morning and that she should prepare herself. Yukari understood, although she had not even the slightest confidence that they would be able to remain at ease around it. Second admitted that he felt the same. In Second's mind, the great ruler of the spirits, Engalmois, was an existence that could potentially become an extremely powerful weapon in his goal of becoming the world's number one. Whether that would be possible, however, depended entirely on whether he could remain at ease around Engalmois. There was also the possibility that Engalmois could be as she. The next day, Second prepared to summon Engalmois. Sylvia was ready, and so was Iko. Yukari was also prepared, although she remained hidden behind Iko. Sylvia noted how sneaky the magic circle beneath Second appeared. Engalmois appeared and immediately demanded to know what Second meant by summoning him. Second first expressed his appreciation for Engalmois coming out normally. Engalmois explained that he simply had no choice but to obey when Second had asked him to do so normally the next time. Second wondered whether Engalmois was pouting. He seemed to be a surprisingly honest fellow. Engalmois then demanded an explanation for something more important. He wanted to know why Second had immediately sent him away and whether Second was not in need of his great powers. Second explained that he did not need Engalmois right now, although he would eventually need him. Engalmois appeared to understand, but immediately reconsidered his response, realizing that this was not an answer. He felt that Second's treatment of him was somewhat crude. After all, Engalmois was the great ruler of the spirits, the one who stood at the top above all spirits. Second simply asked what that had to do with anything. Engalmois was the number one in the entire world. Engalmois was surprised and delighted by Second's declaration, considering his dear Second to be such a great man. He laughed and regarded the title as something that certainly befitted the master of Engalmois, the ruler of all spirits. Second realized that Engalmois was insanely easy to control. His curiosity piqued. Second asked whether Engalmois was male or female, how old he was, and what he should call him. Engalmois explained that he was the great ruler of the spirit. He had neither gender nor age, or rather, he did not mind being male or female, nor being 1 year old or 100,000 years old. His name was Engalmois, but Second was free to call him whatever he liked, whether Angamois or Angulim. Second realized that anything seemed to go with this fellow. He decided to simply call him Engalmois and proceeded to introduce him to his comrades. Engalmois became deeply curious about the comrades of the world's number one. Sylvia and Yukari slowly stood up. Second introduced them from left to right as Sylvia, Yukari, and Iko. Engalmois excitedly recognized all three of them. Sylvia was an expert with the bow, Yukari was a skillful blacksmith, and Iko used a shield. In Engalmois's assessment, they formed a truly balanced team. Second was shocked and wondered how Engalmois knew about them. Engalmois explained that he did not know them directly, but various information had been transferred into his body through Second. Second wondered whether Engalmois was currently reading his mind. To test this, he asked Engalmois about his birthday. Engalmois answered July 7. Second was amazed that Engalmois really was reading his mind. He then asked Engalmois who had been the very first emperor of Japan. Second was certain that there was no way Engalmois could know something like that. Engalmois simply laughed and identified Emperor Jinmu as the answer. Second immediately realized that this was bad. Engalmois laughed and reminded Second not to make light of him. He was the great ruler of the spirits, the one who ruled over all spirits, and therefore there was nothing he could not grasp. Engalmois was no match for his dear Second, or, more accurately, at that moment, he felt that he should call him his dear Seven instead. Second responded with a grim look. At the beginning of chapter 31, Engalmois noticed Second's reaction and asked what was wrong. Second angrily warned him through their mental connection not to reveal anything about him. Engalmois quietly acknowledged the warning, and Second inwardly realized that it had been a close call. Sylvia and Yukari remained confused about what the two of them were communicating. Second now understood that the strange feeling of unity between himself and Engalmois was actually caused by a telepathic system. He had Engalmois try thinking of something, and Engalmois immediately asked through their minds whether Second could hear him. Second confirmed that he could and found the ability incredible. They continued communicating mentally, with Engalmois expressing how pleasant the feeling was. Second agreed and wondered exactly what this feeling of unity was. Engalmois explained that it was simply what it felt like to be united. Second found the sensation far too appealing. His range of tactics had suddenly widened by a huge margin. A telepathic system that had never existed in Mabian, combined with the great ruler of the spirits, Engalmois, was something all secondary players yearned for. Both would greatly contribute to his path toward becoming the world's number one. Engalmois possessed an outstanding quality in the form of the lightning element. As the great ruler of the spirits, he was proof that he ruled over all four great elements of fire, water, wind, and earth. In Mabian, lightning was known as a nameless lightning element. Engalmois could unleash attacks using an element that completely disregarded the absolute elemental weakness rule governing the four elements: fire, earth, wind, water, and then fire again. In any case, lightning had no elemental weakness. It could be called a broken ability, and perhaps because of their feeling of unity, Second strangely knew how to utilize lightning element sorcery. Second was surprised when he looked at his own sorcery skill sheet. Everything from the Oppo form of lightning to the 5th form of lightning had been acquired in the 16th class. This was completely new to him. He could have sworn that the lightning element had never existed among the player-usable sorcery skills in Mabayon. Through telepathy, Second conveyed to Engalmois that he had just learned something incredible. Engalmois naturally regarded the two of them as truly compatible. Second considered the matter of compatibility. It did not feel like something that could be settled with such a simple word, but the cost of it eluded him regardless. Whatever the case, he decided to celebrate the discovery. He laughed mentally and conveyed to Engalmois that he thought they could do well together. Engalmois agreed with a laugh of his own, and the two eventually laughed out loud. Sylvia wondered what the two of them were doing. Yukari suspected that something similar to telepathy was taking place. Sylvia had never heard of such a technique existing for spirit summoners, and Yukari admitted that she had not either. Yukari could only imagine two possibilities. Either it was because Engalmois was the great ruler of the spirit, or it was because of their master. Sylvia found it troubling that either possibility could be responsible. Iko peeked over and wondered whether Engalmois was gone. Sylvia pointed toward Engalmois, who was still laughing with their master, and indicated that he was still there. Second then decided that Engalmois should return. A beep sounded, followed by Engalmois' surprise, and Engalmois vanished. Later, Sylvia was shocked when she heard about the lumberjack earldom. Second confirmed that the steward of the lumberjack family had visited them the previous night and asked whether Sylvia knew about them. Sylvia could hardly believe that Second even needed to ask. Whenever someone mentioned the lumberjack family, the first person who came to mind was the renowned feudal lord of Regnard, Earl Woodcut. Second wondered about the matter. The Earl's outrageously stupid nickname puzzled him. Yukari explained that the commercial town of Regnard had apparently originally been a town that prospered through its lumber industry. Its transformation into such a great city was said to have been solely due to the skill of the lumberjack family. Second realized that this explained why the Earl was called Earl Woodcut. Sylvia added that there was more to the lumberjack family than its connection to woodcutting. Although the family's roots appeared to lie in the lumber industry, they had been known as militants for generations. Rumors claimed that the current head, Earl Beryl, was an exceptionally capable person who was firmly accomplished in both the literary and military arts. Sylvia had also heard that his son and daughter were considerably talented adventurers. Second realized that the heir and heiress of the Earl's family were adventurers. It seemed to be a fairly unrestrained family. Yukari explained that the older brother, Helly's lumberjack, was also outstanding at swordsmanship and was apparently on par with the first prince, Klaus Castall. As for the younger sister, Sherry Lumberjack, Yukari trailed off before Second sought more information about the daughter. Yukari explained that Sherry was known as the prodigious spirit summoner. Sherry commanded powerful spirit arts, and was said to be a prodigy who had become an A-rank adventurer at merely 16 years old. Second found the image of a 16-year-old prodigious spirit summoner, Ares, who seemed smug simply because she was an A-rank adventurer, strangely pleasant. Sylvia noted that they were discussing a 16-year-old prodigy, and pointed out that Yukari had not yet revealed her own age. Yukari explained that she was 19 and then asked about Sylvia and Iko. Sylvia was 17 while Iko was 16. Sylvia then realized that Yukari was the oldest among them. Iko began referring to Yukari as Big Sister. Yukari explained that, in terms of dark elf age, she was still young and would be more comparable to 16 years old. Second wondered what she meant by dark elf age. At the same time, he realized that he was the only one being excluded. The thought was somewhat depressing. Perhaps he would summon Engalmois so that he could at least have someone to talk to. Upon appearing, Engalmois wondered why Second had brought him back again. Second apologized and explained that Iko had been afraid of Engalmois earlier and, more importantly, that he wanted Engalmois to chat with him. Engalmois found the reason somewhat ridiculous for summoning the great ruler of the spirits, but accepted it regardless. Second apologized once more. Engalmois then decided to tell Second about the time he had decimated the great spirit of Earth, Gnome. The incident had occurred one midnight, when Gnome plotted to begin a rebellion in an attempt to defeat Engalmois and take his place as the ruler of the spirits. Second realized that even the spirit world had wars of that sort. It seemed Engalmois had been left with no choice. Engalmois, however, complained that Gnome had not only soiled his night clothes but had also cracked his favorite cup, making the offense unforgivable. Attacking someone in their sleep was shameless, yet Gnome ignored Engalmois and simply attacked him as though he did not care. Engalmois responded in anger by striking Gnome with lightning, instantly reducing him to cinders. He then laughed. Second responded with a bored look. Engalmois continued by assuring him that there was no need to worry. He had allowed Gnome's daughter to take his place as the next great spirit of Earth. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. The butler had arrived to pick Second up and informed him that the Earl was waiting for him at a nearby establishment. Second immediately sent Engalmoys back. Caught off guard, Engalmoys vanished. Later, Second arrived at the estate, where the Earl had prepared a delicious meal. Earl Barrow laughed and warmly welcomed them to eat freely. Eiko immediately began eating with excitement. Second remembered the name Earl Barrow Lumberjack. He was a veteran merchant who possessed both a clear mind and a tough body, an elegant man who resembled a seasoned warrior. His modest appearance could easily be deceiving. Second recognized the meal for what it was, a complete reception. Barrow was entertaining them so generously that it actually began to turn Second off, as it made it obvious how badly Barrow wanted the mithril alloy. Barrow then asked how they found the food. He pointed out a stew made with mushrooms harvested in Regnard, which happened to be a favorite among his children. He had noticed that everyone in the A-rank team, the fastest, was in their teens, and that his daughter Sherry was 16 years old, although she was somewhat of a restless horse. He hoped that everyone would get along well at the banquet the following day. After the meal, Second and Barrow shook hands, with Barrow making it clear that they would meet again tomorrow in Second's mind. The gesture was perfect. Barrow had lowered himself in every regard. He possessed status, prestige, power, and pride, yet Second could not understand why he was willing to go this far. Barrow noticed Second's hesitation and asked what was the matter. Second directly questioned Earl Barrow about why he was going to such lengths to emphasize the importance of this deal. Barrow explained that he firmly believed that if the citizens became wealthy, the soldiers would become more powerful, which would ultimately benefit the country. A weapon and armor industry utilizing mithril alloy, which was robust, lightweight, and durable, was closely linked to strengthening the country. For that reason, it had to be established in his town of Regnard, the center of trade in the kingdom of Castal. Second questioned whether Barrow was doing all of this for the sake of the country. Barrow clarified that his purpose was for the citizens, the soldiers, as well as the country. His business had to be aligned with all three. Second found the mindset ambitious, especially because Barrow differentiated the citizens from the soldiers. In this case, the soldiers would not only be the warriors who served the kingdom but also fighters such as adventurers. Thus, the citizens and soldiers encompassed both amateurs and veterans alike. Earl Barrow Lumberjack understood this world well, particularly the difference between the weak and the strong. That meant Earl Lumberjack would never engage in any sort of monkey business toward someone as powerful as Second, even if heaven and earth were flipped inside out. This deal seemed worth betting on. Second now understood and looked forward to the meeting tomorrow. Barrow felt the same and would be waiting for Second in his territory the following day. He then went to the carriage. The next day, Team Fastest was aboard the carriage. Sylvia and Eiko were sleeping while Second asked Yukari about her plan for handling the deal. Yukari felt that constantly wholesaling mithril alloy would not be in Second's best interest. Instead, they would offload several 100 million CL worth of mithril alloy every few months. She believed that signing short-term contracts each time would be the wisest approach. Second calculated that they could harvest around that much mithril each time at Proline if they based the calculation on 5 runs per day. He then considered how long it would take them to make 30 billion and handed Yukari a paper. Yukari asked him to give her a moment before scanning the paper. After examining it, she determined that it would take around 20 days. Second realized that 30 billion CL could be earned in about 3 weeks. In other words, earning 10 billion CL per day meant that they could make about 1.4 billion in a single day. It was insane. He wondered whether mithril alloy was truly that valuable in this world. Thinking about it calmly, however, he realized that it was only natural. Ordinary golems in Proline had a 6.25% drop rate for mithril. Compared to the drops from mithril golem, the amount was only about a 20th in size. Furthermore, since the area had not really been raided yet, mithril alloy was obviously a scarce resource. Second asked Yukari whether that sounded abnormal. Yukari did not think so. The abnormality would likely come from their ability to make 5 runs per day. Second laughed and agreed. They would also have to factor in the possibility of the mithril alloy's value collapsing. Yukari agreed, particularly with deals worth 30 billion CL. If they gave themselves some free time, a duration of 2 to 3 months would be acceptable. Second considered that making 30 billion in 3 weeks would require them to make 5 runs every day without taking any break. They should instead give themselves some breathing room by taking 2 days off per week and occasionally stopping after 3 runs to relax in the afternoons. Second decided that they would proceed in the direction he had indicated and asked Yukari to handle the meeting for him as well. Yukari assured him that she would take care of it. Second scratched his face. Yukari's eyes turned toward something in the distance. She could now see the place, and she informed her master that they had arrived. At the beginning of chapter 32, they were now in the commercial town of Regnard. Inside, several people were gathered around a table for a meeting. Yukari handled the explanations for Second, who left everything to her while constantly nodding in recognition as though he understood exactly what was happening. In reality, he did not understand a single thing. One of the men praised the meeting as truly worthwhile and commended them for their efforts. Another expressed his honor at being able to attend as well and confirmed that the contract should be acceptable in its current form. Second agreed and thanked him before asking Yukari for her thoughts. Yukari confirmed that everything was proceeding as they had planned. Second realized that, in simple terms, it amounted to a 30 billion CL deal over the course of 2 months. He held Yukari's face and enthusiastically thanked her, praising her brilliance. Yukari pointed out that the contract had yet to be finalized, and Second noticed her ear twitch. After a short recess, they would attend a banquet with the Earl's family and other dignitaries. In Second's mind, Yukari was his benevolent savior. Later, a crowd of people dressed in formal clothes gathered at the banquet. Barrow laughed and praised Team Fastest as truly magnificent while holding his glass of wine, continuing to laugh as he playfully tapped Second. Second began thinking about how he could get away and wondered how all the others were doing. Sylvia was approached by a girl who knew her father. Sylvia was surprised that the girl knew him, while the girl explained that Sylvia's father had been assisting her greatly. Sylvia responded with honor at hearing this. Second concluded that the girl seemed to be an acquaintance of Sylvia's father. Meanwhile, Yukari appeared to be engaged in complex discussions with several elite middle-aged men. Before the banquet, Yukari had mentioned that she intended to steal some know-how, and she seemed to be carrying that out now. As for Iko, Second saw her being surrounded and fed by some older maids. Second looked around and felt completely out of place. Unsure of what he should do, he was about to decide to join Iko when someone asked to speak with him for a moment. Second turned toward the boys and saw a grumpy-looking girl. He asked who she was and learned that she was Sherry Lumberjack, the Earl's daughter. Sherry indicated that Second had been called upon by her, implying that he should feel honored. Second could only respond uncertainly. Sherry then warned him not to get ahead of himself. Second insisted that he was not getting ahead of himself, which only irritated her further. She questioned his attitude, leaving Second unsure of how to react. Sherry ordered him to follow her and walked away, but Second remained where he was. 1 minute later, Sherry returned and once again told him to follow her. She then dragged him by the wrist. Sagan wondered whether Sherry had been talking to herself for a moment without realizing it. When they reached the balcony, Sherry asked whether Second was a spirit summoner. He corrected her assumption, explaining that she was mistaken. Sherry was surprised to have been wrong and became unsure of what to say. Second could see her confusion and wondered whether he had toyed with her a little too much. He then admitted that he did make use of a spirit. Sherry reacted in shock, realizing that he truly was a spirit summoner after all. She then warned Sagan that this was the perfect time to remember that, merely because her father had taken a liking to him, he should not push his luck. Second maintained that he was not pushing his luck. Sherry complained about his tone and revealed that she was an A-rank adventurer, making it clear that he should show her more respect. Second pointed out that he was an A-rank adventurer as well. Sherry proudly explained that the 4 of them were A-ranks together, whereas she was an A-rank all by herself. Second realized that she was a loner and that it would probably be impossible for anyone else to handle her like this. Sherry became furious at his lukewarm glance and demanded to know what was wrong with his attitude. Second suggested that, if she had a problem, she should try discussing it with him. Sherry punched him and made it clear that she did not need his help. Second winced in pain and demanded to know what the hell she was doing. Sherry explained that Second had brought it upon himself by not knowing his place, and that what happened to him was simply his just deserts. Second was already irritated, wondering what in the world she wanted from him. The girl was seriously getting on his nerve. He asked why she had called him out there, and whether it was simply to beat him up. Sherry angrily denied it and condemned his rudeness. Instead, she intended to show him exactly what the difference in their status was. Second repeated the point about their difference in status, and Sherry confirmed it. Second had more or less expected that and accepted the challenge, wondering how she intended to teach him about their difference in status. Sherry snickered, confident that he would find out soon enough. She then wondered how long he could maintain his composure and urged him to witness her spirit before begging for mercy. A magic circle appeared, and a dark elf emerged from it. The dark elf looked magical before addressing Sherry and asking whether she had called for her. Sherry ordered Terra to tell the disgusting man who she was. Terra understood and introduced herself as Terra, also known as Nomides, the great spirit of Earth. Terra and Second shook hands. Second thanked her for her kindness and introduced himself. Terra expressed that she was pleased to meet him as well. Sherry angrily reprimanded Terra for being so casual with Second and ordered her to properly state her name. Terra apologized to her master. Second believed that the great spirit of Earth was quite rare and recalled that she had an initial spirit strength of 32,000. With that in mind, he felt that the difference in their status would certainly be made clear. Sherry became angry at Second's laughter and demanded to know what he found so amusing. She urged him to hurry and send out his own trashy spirit. At the same time, she found the idea of him sending it out after the Great Spirit of Earth amusing, since whatever appeared would inevitably be hilarious. Second grinned, acknowledging that it certainly would be hilarious. He indicated that, if Shin was willing, he could summon his spirit then and there. Sherry smirked as Second prepared to summon the spirit, but before he could do so, Sylvia suddenly barged in and announced that Iko had collapsed. Second was shocked and immediately ran away with Sylvia. Sherry attempted to call after him, but he had already left. Later, in Iko's room, the doctor explained that Iko had eaten too much but would soon recover as long as she rested comfortably. Iko weakly explained that she had thought it would be a waste to leave food behind. Second wondered whether the food had really been that delicious or whether it was simply some kind of feline beast-folk behavior. Either way, he decided that he would have to manage her eating himself. Iko must not become a fat feline, especially since turning into a fat Iko would interfere with her main duty as well. The next morning, during the final meeting, Yukari explained that as long as they supplied sufficient mithril alloy, they were bound to make 30 billion CL or more. Second did not understand the specifics, but what he needed to do was extremely simple. He needed to actively explore the Proline dungeon and earn experience points. Later, the document was signed and Second shook hands with Beryl. In front of the carriage, Beryl expressed his anticipation of the day when he could meet Team Fastest again. He then asked whether the town of Bad Gold would be sufficient as their return destination. Second confirmed that it was and that they would head back. Yukari called out to her master because Second appeared to be thinking about something. Second realized that he actually felt as though he were forgetting something, but he could not remember what it was. He eventually dismissed the thought and decided that it did not matter, since they were leaving now. Suddenly, Sherry called out to Second and announced that she was joining them as well. Sherry walked toward him, and Second's expression became grim. For about 2 hours after they entered the carriage, Sherry and Second constantly chatted. Whenever Second tried to act stupid and confused, Sherry would interrupt and get into a fight with him. It was practically like a comedy duo act, with the two of them endlessly switching between the funny person and the straight man. Sherry pointed at him again, while Yukari simply closed her eyes. Sylvia and Iko watched them. All in all, Second thought, this girl always seemed happy, no matter how much she complained. Second wondered what had made Sherry go with them. Sherry looked down before explaining that it was a contest between her and Second to determine which of them was the better spirit summoner. They had to get to the bottom of that. Second wondered how they were supposed to determine it and whether it would come down to a fist fight. Sherry was puzzled by the idea. Since they were spirit summoners, it was obvious that they would compete through their spirit art. Strictly speaking, Second was not a spirits of moaner though. He dismissed the matter and asked how they were going to compete. Sherry thought about it. Second pointed out that she was only thinking of a method now. Sherry clarified that this was not quite the case. There were too many possible methods to choose from, which was why she was puzzled over which one to use. Her eyes lit up when she finally got an idea. They would compete based on contribution points at the Adventurer Guild. Second found it amusing that she had only just come up with the idea. Sherry took offense at his reaction and denied it. With that settled, Second wondered how competing through contribution points had anything to do with spirit art. Sherry explained that they were spirit summoners, so they would earn points by using spirit art. She sighed with a smug look. To Second, her expression seemed to say that the contest would be a piece of cake. Second could build up contributions even without using spirit arts, but he agreed with Sherry and asked how long the contest would last. Sherry paused before deciding that it would begin the following day. She then changed her mind and set the starting point at sunrise the day after instead. The one who earned the most contribution points before sunset would win. Second agreed. When they arrived at Bad Gold, Sherry took a room next to Second. Going along with the flow, she also joined them for dinner, creating what Second considered the most annoying situation in the world. The adventurers recognized Sherry Lumberjack and her reputation as the prodigious spirit summoner. Sherry smiled smugly at their recognition. Second mumbled that Sherry was an incredibly surprising person, but Sherry immediately smacked his shoulder and made it clear that he did not need to add the word surprisingly. Second thought that Sherry truly was a wonder child of a straight man, using both her mouth and her hands. Still, he had gradually begun getting used to Sherry. Moreover, it actually made him a little happy that Sherry would always interrupt whenever he acted stupid. Sylvia was too serious, Yukari was too indifferent, and Iko was too adorable. Second could not expect good comedic interruptions from any of his team members. In a way, Sherry might be someone who filled that gap. Later, while lying on his bed, Second was reminded of something. He then summoned Engalmoise. A magic circle appeared, and a grumpy-looking Engalmoise emerged. Engalmoise greeted Second and noted that it had been a long while. He angrily looked at Second when Second did not apologize, explaining that he had been tied up with a bunch of stuff. Engalmoise glared closely at him and questioned whether that was really the case before indicating that he wanted to hear about what had kept Second occupied. Later, Engalmoise learned that Second had met Nomides. Second explained that Nomides was employed under the name Terra and had a fluffy impression. Engalmois acknowledged that Terra might indeed give that impression, but she was not a girl that Second could grasp. Second reminded Engalmois that he had killed Terra's father and wondered whether it would be all right for Engalmois to meet Terra. Engalmois denied having killed Terra's father and clarified that he had decimated Terra's father. Engalmois laughed and assured Second that there was nothing to worry about. There was no problem at all. Rather, Terra was pleased that she had been able to become a great spirit. Second was surprised. In his mind, Terra might actually be a surprisingly cool spirit. He told Engalmois that, in that case, there would be no problem with Engalmois seeing Terra. Engalmois agreed and added that he could scare the Sherry girl who was with her as well, laughing at the thought. Second suggested that they go now if Engalmois wanted to see her, since they were just next door. Engalmois' expression suddenly changed. Second noticed and wondered what was wrong. Engalmois focused on the fact that Second had said they were next door and asked whether he meant the room to the left. Second confirmed it. Engalmois then revealed that he could not sense anyone in the room to the left. Second was confused. They were not in their room. Where could they have gone so late at night? As he thought about it, Second realized that something was off. He tried to remember what Sherry had said. She had called it a guild contribution contest, and it was supposed to begin the day after tomorrow. Then why had Sherry not simply chosen the morrow from the beginning? What was the point behind a random contest that seemed as though Sherry had only thought of it on the spot? Why had Sherry bumped into him? Why had she followed them? Why had she wanted to hold a contest? Second considered the possibilities until Engalmois identified the reason as envy. Thinking about it, Second could not deny that Sherry was envious of him. It was likely the envy of a fellow spirit summoner, and in trying to find a way to rid herself of that envy, Sherry had ended up traveling together with them. That raised another possibility. Perhaps her goal was to take away the meaning of his existence, or something similar. In other words, that was what she intended to accomplish in Bad Gold. Second was shocked when he realized it. Engalmois confirmed that there was no doubt about it. Second frantically cursed at how much of a pain in the ass that girl was going to be. In his mind, Sherry was far too reckless. At this rate, she would likely perish. He took a step forward, cursing his exhaustion and frustration with the situation. Engalmois turned toward him and laughed, noting that even though Second was complaining, it was noble of him to run to someone's rescue. Meanwhile, inside the cave, Sherry was determined to conquer Proline Dungeon before Second did. Once she succeeded, everyone would have no choice but to recognize her. They would have no choice but to value her highly. Her father, her mother, Second, and everyone else would finally put her in their sights. Nobody would leave her. The liveliness that surrounded Second would become hers, and she would no longer be all alone. She would change. She would use her envy toward him as a stepping stone to change herself. Sherry intended to tell Terra that once she had conquered the dungeon, she would tell Second to make her his comrade. If Sherry failed to properly tell Second that herself, Terra was supposed to fill in for her at that time. Terra smiled and agreed. He considered that if Sherry had still only fought some ordinary golems along the way, he could simply bitch-slap her and drag her back. The real problem was if Sherry had already reached the boss. The boss of Proline Dungeon was the Mithril Golem, famed for always killing first-time challengers. It was a golem monster that grew larger. Everyone tended to think that it was simply another golem impervious to physical attacks, but that was a massive misconception. Physical attacks were difficult to use against a golem, while sorcery was a decent strategy for defeating one. Mithril golems were different, however. Neither physical attacks nor sorcery were particularly effective against them. Players who confronted a Mithril golem for the first time without prior knowledge usually had a simplistic mindset. They believed that using sorcery would be enough to fight it and often fired off something like the Coral form of fire. As expected, no damage would get through. Then the Mithril golem, having set its sights on the player, would intervene while the player was exhausted and unable to move after using sorcery. They would be crushed without any means of countering and could only await death. Starting with sorcery practically guaranteed death. The proper way to deal with it was simple. One had to wait until building up a physical attack skill powerful enough to damage a Mithril golem. Until then, one simply did not enter Proline Dungeon. Second wondered whether Sherry had high physical attack power. Probably not. Even if she could defeat the golems along the way, she surely could not defeat the Mithril golem. Second ran inside the dungeon with Engalmois leading the way. In Second's mind, Engalmois seemed capable of detecting Nomide's presence, which meant that Sherry was still alive. At the beginning of Chapter 34, Second rushed into the dungeon after slaying a golem. He tried to avoid aggroing as much as possible, aiming to get through with as few battles as possible. In any case, he sprinted as fast as he could. Back with Sherry, memories surfaced of how she had been alone since she was a little girl. She knew why she kept insulting people and why nobody wanted to become acquainted with the heiress of an earl. It was inevitable. She was an earl's daughter, after all. Because of her personality, She had never considered correcting it or even believed that doing so was possible. Truthfully, she felt lonely. It was because of that loneliness that she had considered learning the spirit arts, hoping to gain a one-of-a-kind friend who would never leave her side. She used the spirit to bury away her loneliness. Her eyes widened at the sight of Terra, and she smiled proudly. She was the prodigious spirit summoner, after all. She was the heiress of an earl, had a beautiful face and figure, and was also an A-rank adventurer. She could survive by herself, and that was how she had lived until now. That was why she had never experienced such a pleasant feeling before. Being able to talk to someone who could accept her harsh personality felt wonderful. The desire to have a human friend felt pleasant as well. After all, this was the very first companion she had stumbled upon in all the years she had lived. She absolutely would not give up. She would make him speechless and make him recognize her. Another golem appeared. Sherry instructed Thera that there was one in front of them. Thera agreed and briefly defeated the golem. Sherry then urged her to hurry ahead. She soon saw a pile of rock. Tara looked at it and remembered what the massive rocks from the mountain were. She urgently warned Sherry to get back. But the pile of rock moved. Sherry looked at what stood before her and saw the mithril golem. The mithril golem looked at them. Tara identified it as the boss of the area and recognized that they could not defeat it. Their only option was to flee. Sherry could now see that the mithril golem was the boss. She decided that they would fight it despite Tara's protests. Her thoughts trailed off as she focused on defeating the creature, and she clenched her fist. She instructed Tara to prepare the fifth form of earth. Tara clicked her tongue. Sherry knew that this was the most powerful sorcery she had recently learned and the strongest attack she could perform right now. She signaled Tara to fire. Tara gestured with her hands and controlled the rock. It floated above the golem before the massive rocks fell upon it. Sherry eagerly wondered whether they had defeated it. Dust still covered the golem, and Sherry smiled as she believed they had defeated the Proline boss. They had conquered Proline before Second did. She was delighted. But as the smoke cleared, the golem was still standing. It was completely unharmed. Tara was exhausted after using the sorcery, and Sherry realized that she was now completely vulnerable. The golem kicked Sherry. She coughed out blood and was rammed toward the rocky wall. Tara shouted and ran toward her master. Sherry fell. With no strength left to move, she wondered how many seconds had passed and what she had come there for in the first place. She could see Tara in front of her, but she could no longer understand what Tara was saying. The golem looked at them. Within Sherry's mind, Tara embraced her, as though trying to protect her. Sherry understood what Tara was doing and silently expressed her gratitude. She could no longer speak properly, but she hoped Tara would understand the message. In her mind, she thanked Tara for remaining beside someone as idiotic, foolish, lonely, and hopeless as herself. She offered Tara her final goodbye. Then her eyes widened. Second had appeared between her and the golem. He sliced off one of the mithril golem's arms before flying toward its body and striking it. He continued attacking the mithril golem consecutively. Sherry recognized the technique as the cast-all swordsmanship skill. She had seen her big brother, a first-class swordsman, use it before. It was an incredibly powerful skill, but Second's might was clearly abnormal. It was on an entirely different level. Even so, Second was overwhelmed by the massive golem. He was an A-rank adventurer, just like Sherry. The thought made everything feel almost laughable. The prodigious spirit summoner and heiress of an earl meant nothing in the face of this situation. Tara reassured Sherry that everything would be all right now and that they would be saved. Tara smiled at her, but Sherry could no longer return the smile. She could not do anything anymore. Even so, she felt sorry for Tara. She was sorry for being this kind of master. She had only wanted to do something. Perhaps the one who had been getting ahead of herself all along had actually been her. Sherry closed her eyes. Her final thoughts were filled with the realization that she was a fool. Truly, she was an unimaginable fool. At the beginning of Chapter 35, Second decided to allocate all the XP he had gained from the monsters along the way to spirit possession. It ranked up to the 11th class, making it borderline usable. As they ran, Engalmois noticed that the girl seemed to be in trouble. Second understood that Sherry was on the verge of death and decided to use the possession skill there. Second activated the power, and his body began to glow brightly. At the 11th class, spirit possession had a possession duration of 120 seconds and a 442-second cooldown before it could be used again. It also boosted all of his stats by 2.5 times. Second looked at the golem as it approached Sherry and Tara. It swung its fist, but Second stepped between them just in time and sliced through the golem's arm. In his mind, he recognized that as long as the golem possessed sufficient physical attack power, its relatively predictable attack pattern made it the type of boss that was easy to defeat. Even so, one needed to be reasonably accustomed to fighting it. Sadly, the people of this world died before they ever had the chance to become accustomed to it. Second stood before the now-dead mithril golem and sighed. The spirit possession skill had already ended. He then laughed, realizing once again that spirit possession was truly a bomb. Its overwhelming power felt amazing, and he thought he could easily make a habit of using it. Terra called out to Second, drawing his attention toward her. She expressed her sincerest gratitude for what he had done. Second was more concerned with what had just happened. If he had not noticed in time, the two of them would have died. Terra lowered her head. Second remembered that Sherry needed to drink something. It was the high potion. He held Sherry and forced the potion into her mouth. She remained unconscious, but he believed that she would probably be okay. Terra explained that Sherry was actually a good girl at heart. Second already knew that Sherry was not a bad person. Her personality was simply more twisted than most people's. She was hasty, stupid, and lonely. Terra agreed with his assessment. Ever since Sherry was little, she had never had any other friends apart from Terra. Second was not surprised. Terra then revealed that Sherry had likely taken a liking to Second. These feelings were something Sherry had experienced for the first time since she was born, and Terra did not believe that Sherry knew how to handle them. Second realized that Terra was essentially saying Sherry had acted that way to gain his affection. Terra confirmed that this was also connected to Sherry's desire to be recognized by her parents. Sherry believed there were many reasons involved, but that was likely not the primary one. Second mumbled something under his breath. Terra was about to ask what he had said when Second suddenly shouted at her to stop fooling around and angrily called her a bitch. He demanded that Terra watch over Sherry properly. Terra explained that she was a spirit and could not oppose her master. Second grew increasingly irritated with her. He could not understand what was wrong with this woman, and Terra was seriously getting on his nerve. Terra hugged Sherry and apologized, asking Seiken not to hate the child. Seiken did not hate Sherry. He did not particularly dislike her, either, but he considered her a pain in the ass, a seriously royal pain in the ass. Second then remembered to bring out the Great Master. He chanted spirit summoning and Engalmois appeared. Terra's eyes widened and she began to stutter. Engalmois questioned why Terra was still standing. He raised his hand and used his lightning magic. Terra stumbled forward, sweating profusely, before bowing deeply in front of Engalmois. Second was shocked and immediately told Engalmois not to do that. At the same time, he wondered what the hell was going on. Engalmois wondered whether he had done something wrong and apologized to Second. Terra was now able to move again and sat up. Second then questioned whether Engalmois could not sense his thoughts through the feeling of unity. Engalmois understood what Second meant and agreed to directly address his inquiry. Engalmois explained that spirits and their masters gradually become one. The more compatible they are, the longer they live together. Gnome's daughter Terra was being controlled by Sherry. Whether it was sympathy or longing, her inability to oppose her master's commands was no more than an excuse. Terra should never have allowed her master to reach the verge of death. Terra was no longer qualified to be a great spirit. Terra could not answer. Second objected to the conclusion. If spirits and their masters gradually became one, then would that not make it even more tempting for a spirit to obey its master? Engalmois denied this. Spirits could not be unilaterally controlled. To become united meant reaching an understanding with one another. Terra had simply become too intimate with her master. Second found the situation somewhat pitiful. If someone encountered a lonely child who could not make any friends, it was only natural to want to be there for them. Considering it from that perspective, he could understand Terra's actions. Engalmois wondered whether Second was still angry with Sherry. After hearing the story, however, Second's compassionate side had overcome his anger. Engalmois accepted that explanation and decided to acquit Terra, laughing as he did so. Second questioned whether he was truly certain. Engalmois explained that Second had simply been making a mountain out of a molehill. He had not the slightest interest in the master-servant relationship between some random spirit and her master. He had merely been picking on Terra for fun. Second thought that Engalmois had a seriously bad personality. He could not even remember when that had started happening. He then decided that it was time to head back. Second picked up Sherry, but his eyes widened when he noticed that her clothes were wet and fluid had run down her legs. He realized that the girl had wet herself. Second continued forward and woke Sylvia through the team chat, asking her to prepare to help with Sherry's backside. Sylvia was rattled awake, and through the team chat she understood that Second needed her to prepare a change of clothes and boil some water. As he carried Sherry, Second thought that once this idiot woke up, she had better prepare herself properly. They eventually walked out of the dungeon. When Sherry woke up, she was utterly shocked. She sat up on her bed, trying to remember what she had been doing. Terra hurriedly went over and embraced her. Remembering what had happened, Sherry apologized to Terra. Terra told her there was no need to apologize and admitted that she should have advised Sherry about it much earlier. Sherry slapped her bed and refused to let Terra take the blame. She had been the one who had freely rushed in herself, and Terra had done nothing wrong. Terra disagreed. She explained that her master had developed feelings for Second. Sherry's eyes widened. She wanted to know what Terra was talking about, and her face immediately began to redden. The realization that she had taken a liking to Second left her completely flustered. She could hardly believe it and thought Tara had to be mistaken. Tara pointed out that Sherry's reddening face was the clearest evidence of the truth. Sherry insisted that it was impossible, but Tara questioned why she had been so reckless. She had tried to raid Proline and had even come with Second to this town. Sherry could only stutter in response. Tara laughed as she explained that those feelings were precisely what taking a liking to someone meant. Sherry reflected on everything she had felt. Wanting Second to recognize her, wanting him to look at her, and wanting to speak with him more had all been signs that she had taken a liking to him. Tara admitted that she should have pointed it out much earlier. If she had, Sherry might not have ended up on the verge of death or experienced such an embarrassing situation. Sherry remained confused before realizing just how embarrassing the situation had been. Tara explained that although her master had collapsed and suffered a nosebleed, Second had rescued Sherry. He had given her a potion while she was unconscious, allowing her to recover instantly, and then carried her all the way back. Sherry was delighted to learn that Second had given her a potion capable of instantly healing someone in the state she had been and must have been fairly expensive. She considered repaying him with some flair, but the thought of her nosebleed made her hesitate. That part was a little embarrassing. Sherry then wondered whether she had been wearing a skirt like the one she had on now. She recalled her entire outfit from before. Tara revealed the truth. Sherry had wet herself. Sherry was dumbfounded. She could hardly comprehend what Tara had just told her. Tara gleefully confirmed that Sherry had indeed peed herself. Sherry cursed as tears welled up in her eyes from embarrassment. At the beginning of chapter 36, a knock at the door woke Second. He opened it and, still half asleep, demanded to know what was going on. Sherry stood there fully embarrassed, holding a letter, which she handed to him. Second looked at it cluelessly. Sherry then ran away, apologizing and expressing her gratitude while indicating that they would see each other again. Tara smiled beside the wandering Second and conveyed that they would never forget Second's benevolence. She also conveyed that the great ruler, as well as Tara, would follow the running Sherry. Second wondered what was going on with those two. The letter contained 3 subjects: apology, gratitude, and reunion, all written in glorious detail. Second thought that Sherry had already told him those things when she left just now, and he went back to sleep. Later, Second told the others that it was time for a strategy meeting. Iko was excited. They gathered in the middle of the Adventurers Guild. Thinking about it, Second realized that Sherry had returned to Regnard in the end. The receptionist of the inn had informed him of this and given him a package Sherry had left in the receptionist's care. It was a bag filled with gold coins, apparently payment for helping her. Almost 2 million CL worth was inside. Sherry was a surprisingly honest person. Ethan told Sylvia that he would first explain the plan from that point onward. Sylvia acknowledged that she had been waiting for it. She had been growing remarkably lately and had become incredibly motivated toward her training. Second told Sylvia that her goal was to get all of her skills to the 9th grade and learn multiply and charge attack for magic archery. Both were offensive skills that increased her firepower. Lastly, if she had free time, she should acquire the promoted bishop and promoted rook archery skills. Sylvia hesitated over this, recalling that Second had previously considered promoted bishop and promoted roof to be garbage skills. Second confirmed that assessment, explaining that they were rather difficult skills to use. Not only did they take a toll on Sylvia, but they also required a ton of XP. To put it mildly, they were trash when Sylvia was starting off with her training. For someone experienced, however, they were must-learn skills that had to be utilized effectively. Most importantly, in order to attain a title, all of Sylvia's skills needed to be in the 9th grade. This made acquiring promoted bishop and promoted rook major prerequisite. Sylvia then realized that this meant she was meant to attain a title and was shocked at the prospect. Second clarified that the ultimate goal was for her to attain the archery title of Demon Piercer. Sylvia still could not believe it. In Second's mind, he would eventually end up taking it for himself. For Sylvia, that was all. Next was Iko. Iko energetically agreed. Second told Iko that she must first prioritize acquiring promoted rook's shieldsmanship above all else. Once Iko acquired it, they would aggressively raise it to the 1st grade. Afterwards, if Iko had free time, she would acquire the remaining shieldsmanship skills, and then aim for a title. Iko exclaimed in response, leaving Second unable to understand what she had just said, though he assumed it meant that she understood. Lastly, they had Yukari. Yukari swiftly stood beside Second, her face hardened. Second began sweating because her breast was too close. He told Yukari that she would continue along this path until her blacksmithing reached the 9th grade, after which she would acquire endowment skill and raise it to the 9th grade as well. Yukari asked about endowment skill. Second confirmed that it was a skill that imbued special effects onto equipment. If Yukari raised it to the 9th grade, it would become insanely good. Yukari's eyes sparkled at this prospect, and she accepted that the task should be left to her. She then asked about her master's plan. Second's first objective was to acquire a promoted bishop and promote rook swordsmanship. Second, he would raise spirit possession to a high grade. Third, he would learn transformation. Fourth, he would tell them once they got there. Fifth, he would fetch the fourth form from Min. Sixth, he would attain titles for swordsmanship, sorcery, as well as the summon art. Sylvia asked Second to hold on for a moment, overwhelmed by the number of things they had to get involved with. Iko was puzzled by the mention of transformation, while Yukari found it frightening how concrete Second's outlook sounded. Second thought about the transformation he was planning to acquire. It was a buff skill similar to spirit possession, allowing someone to temporarily boost their stats drastically. Once he learned it, his preparations would finally be complete. His stats would be raised, and his preparations for a certain target would be in place. At any rate, Second explained that they would basically earn XP at Proline while getting rich from Beryl with Mithril. For more or less the next 2 months, they would go back and forth between Proline and the inn, so he would be counting on them to handle their respective parts. Iko gleefully agreed to do her best. The 3 adults smiled at her, and Second affirmed the plan. From afar, someone was peeking from a building. It was a girl, and it was actually Sherry. She wondered whether Second had already read her letter. Tara noticed someone approaching and informed Sherry that someone was coming. A man approached and asked whether she was Sherry Lumberjack. Sherry looked at him, annoyed by his sudden appearance, and wanted to know who he was. The man apologized and introduced himself as Serum, explaining that he was a huge fan of Sherry. He was a 19-year-old C-rank adventurer and was still a spirit summoner trainee. Sherry found him annoying and wondered who cared about any of that, especially when she was busy at the moment. Serum, however, explained that he had always wanted to see the Great Spirit of Earth up close. Compared to the nymph, Tara was incredible, with an aura that was on an entirely different level. The nymph spirit appeared and apologized for being an hour-less spirit. Serum laughed, while Sherry ignored him. Tara seemed to recognize the nymph and wondered whether she could be the wind spirit. The nymph confirmed that she was a wind spirit named Nymph, and expressed her honor at being acknowledged by Nomide. Tara smiled and was glad to meet Nymph. Thinking about it, she realized that she had met the Great Ruler the previous night. Nymph and Serum were shocked upon hearing that Tara had met the Great Ruler. Serum realized that Tara meant the Great Ruler of the Spirit. Tara confirmed that she was referring to the Great Ruler of the Spirits, Angalmois. Angalmois stood at the peak of the spirit world and was considered a most terrifying man. Serum was amazed by the existence of such an incredible spirit and wanted to know where he could find Angalmois. Tara explained that Angalmois was serving a man named Second and pointed out that he was just over there. Sherry was shocked and wondered why Tara had not told her about that. For Second to have such an inconceivable spirit serving him was something she could hardly comprehend. As she thought about it, she remembered all of her previous remarks about Second and became flustered. Tara admitted that she had forgotten. Sherry immediately realized that Tara could not possibly have forgotten something so important and became even more exasperated. Tara apologized. In Sherry's mind, a spirit summoner with the Great Ruler of the Spirits serving him had no way of being someone she could match. Looking around, she wondered where the nasty long hair had gone. Tara pointed forward and indicated that the nasty long hair had gone over there. Sherry was surprised to see Serum and the nymph running toward Second. She realized that they would be discovered by Second and decided that they needed to run. Tara followed her. Outside the inn, Second looked at what was in front of him. Serum approached and confirmed whether he was Second. Second confirmed that he was. Serum introduced himself as a spirit summoner named Serum and explained that Sherry had introduced Second to him. Second wondered what was up with the man and why Sherry had introduced him. The nymph spirit introduced herself and explained that Second was the master of the Great Ruler. Because of this, she had come as an insignificant twin spirit to extend her greetings to Second. That was the circumstance behind her presence. Second found the way the nymph spoke strangely Japanese. The spirit nymph Eseikund was also fairly certain that this particular one had a spirit strength of 17,000. Eseikund then asked Serum whether something was wrong. Serum made it clear that he most certainly wanted to see the Great Ruler of the Spirit. Deep down, Second disliked people like him who seemed to believe that buttering up Second would make things easier for them. Suddenly, Second received a message alert. Yukari had sent him a team chat message. Yukari glanced at Second and sent him a message warning that Serum knew about assassination, so Second should remain vigilant. Second was confused. This man named Serum had knowledge about assassination? He wondered whether Yukari was kidding. Perhaps making contact while acting like a commoner was a technique used in assassination. Serum asked whether it was possible after all. Second wondered what the man's motive could be if that was the case. What kind of benefit could Serum possibly gain from seeing Angalmois? Second decided to ask him why he wanted to see Angalmois so badly. If he did not know something, he would simply ask. That was his style, regardless of whether the man was an assassin or not. Serum paused before explaining that the Great Spirit of Earth had claimed Angalmois was a frightening being who stood at the peak of the spirit world. As a spirit summoner, he considered it perfectly natural to want to seek an audience by any means necessary. Second understood and found the answer acceptable, provided Serum was genuinely a spirit summoner. Then he thought of a good idea. He decided to show Serum Angalmois. Serum could hardly believe it and expressed his gratitude to Second. Angalmois appeared with a smirk. Second ordered Angalmois to make the nymph and Serum kneel. Angalmois accepted Second's will. Lightning power crackled, forcing Serum to his knees. Serum was left wondering what had happened as he knelt before Angalmois. Second remembered that Angalmois had done the same thing to Terra. There were too many unknowns. If this technique that forced people to grovel could be used in battle, Second believed it would be unstoppable. Angalmois communicated through the mind that lightning of domination was a special privilege of Angalmois as the great ruler of the spirits. However, it only worked on demon spirits and their masters, which limited its uses. Second finally understood. Angalmois had used it to force frightened people to bow and then make them even more frightened. Second found it awful. Nymph muttered that it was an honor to be acknowledged by the great ruler. Second began to feel that the two seemed somewhat pitiful. Perhaps they should raise their heads now. Angalmois signaled for both of them to raise their heads. Second smiled, feeling a magnificent sense of unity. Serum was delighted to be standing before the great ruler of the spirits. Angalmois looked at him and communicated to Second that Serum was somewhat strange. Angalmois intended to investigate through Nymph and asked Second for a moment. Yukari whispered to Second that Serum was waiting for an opportunity to escape. Second was seriously surprised by this. Angalmois sent his lightning toward Nymph, causing Serum to react. Angalmois ordered Serum not to move and condemned him as an insolent fellow. Angalmois forced Serum to kneel again. He then communicated to Second that he had discovered Serum was a spy from the so-called Marbel Empire. Serum had apparently been sniffing around the adventurer districts in the kingdom of Castal. Second was surprised. A spy from a place like that had attracted his attention, so perhaps Serum was merely scouting or attempting to recruit him. Second did not really know, but it did not seem like a particularly good reason. He communicated with Angalmois through telepathy and ordered him to raise Serum's head. Angalmois accepted Second's will. Serum wondered what was happening and questioned whether he had done anything to start them off on the wrong foot. Second considered that if all of this was an act, then the situation was serious. Even if Serum was merely a dog of the Empire, he was still top-notch. Second did not hate the Marbel Empire all that much. They followed a rule of putting raw strength first and saw no need for predatory trick. They dominated their neighboring countries through head-to-head battles of strength, and their sudden ascension into a powerful nation was somewhat akin to becoming the world's #1. For now, Second decided that he would simply make sure Serum could never forget the name of the man who would eventually become the world's #1. After that, he would send Serum back on his merry way. Second knowingly glared at Serum, acknowledging that he had done an excellent job while identifying him as the dog of the Empire. At the beginning of Chapter 37, the point of view was Serum's. He had been hiding while investigating a potential enemy country of the Marbel Empire, and he had already infiltrated the kingdom of Castel for 3 months. Then he saw someone. It was truly fortuitous that he had been able to observe Sherry Lumberjack's spirit up close. The great spirit of Earth Terra was rather troublesome. She could be considered a possible candidate for the coming war, but there was another big shot whom Serum needed to prioritize above her. He had never expected that person to truly exist. Angalmois. Serum had confirmed that the one who controlled the peak of the spirit world was here in this potential enemy country. He could not simply leave him alone. He could not let this opportunity slip away. To his shock, Second recognized that Serum had done an excellent job and called him the dog of the Empire. Serum immediately felt doomed. He wondered whether Second had understood from the very beginning, and if so, how. Had the great ruler of the spirits done something? Yet Angalmois had not exchanged a single word with his master. In that case, could it have been the Dark Elf? There was not a single factor that should have revealed Serum's identity as a spy of the Empire. He could not understand how he had been exposed. The possibility that Second could read his mind crossed his thoughts, but he had no answer. There was, however, one thing Serum knew. He had lost here, in his own arena. Second had bested him in every possible regard. That was all there was to it. His fate ended there. This was his final struggle. Serum admitted his defeat and wished to write a letter to his family before he died, if possible. No matter what it took, he intended to report this reality to the Empire. In his mind, that was the final mission remaining to him. Second, looking sad, explained that he was telling Serum this because Serum seemed to have the wrong idea. Second was not actually looking to kill him. Serum was confused and sought clarification on whether Second truly meant that he was not going to kill him. Second smirked and confirmed that Serum could do as he wished. If Serum wanted, he could even go with them, since they were going to raid the Proline dungeon afterward. Serum realized that this man had not only known from the beginning that he was a spy of the Empire, but had also tried to confront him before letting him go. Second had tested him, manipulated him, and played around with him. That abnormal composure was all because this was merely a game to Second. Serum was an intelligence operative of the Marbell Empire, and his life was on the line as he tried to negotiate for his survival. Yet Second knew all of that and could still play around with him. Serum could not understand how he maintained such composure. Terrified, Serum decided that he would have to pass. Second accepted his decision and allowed him to leave. Serum then let Nymph return and she vanished. Second stepped forward and gave Serum a message to deliver to his boss. Second was the world's #1, and he liked the Marbell Empire. Serum understood that telling their boss, in other words the Emperor, was what Second meant. He assured Second that he would definitely inform him. In his mind, Serum solemnly swore that he would never forget the terrifying man known as Second, the world's #1. He would leave the kingdom of Castel for later. After the confrontation, Yukari questioned whether letting Serum go had been a good idea. Second considered it an obvious choice. Yukari nonetheless found it remarkable that Second had been so intuitive about Serum being a spy of the Empire. Second revealed that it had actually been Engalmois who discovered Serum's identity for him. Engalmois confirmed that he could extract memories from any spirit under his absolute control and laugh. Second regarded the ruler of the spirit world as incredible. He then reflected that they had made a fairly good impression. Sylvia and Yukari looked blankly at him. Second questioned whether they truly did not know. He liked the Empire quite a bit. Engalmois likewise admitted that he liked the Empire. Second agreed that the Empire was nice, and Engalmois agreed with him. The two girls continued looking at them. Yukari informed her master that Second did not seem to have realized the situation, so she would tell him now. The two of them, however, were far beyond Second's reach. Sylvia pointed out that although Second claimed to like the Empire, he had not only mentally defeated the spy of the Empire and driven him away, but had also provoked the Emperor, which was a reckless act. Second realized that he had just been scolded and understood Sylvia's point. Iko was also bugging him from behind. With that, they decided to go. Second brushed the matter aside and decided that they would head to Prolion now. Iko immediately became eager to go, while Sylvia noted how quickly Second had switched away from the topic. Yukari quietly acknowledged that such a reaction was to be expected from their master. For about 2 months from that point onward, they planned to earn huge amounts of XP at the Prolion dungeon while gathering mithril. However, a little more than a month into their ventures, they surprisingly finished gathering all the mithril necessary to fulfill their deal with Earl Barrel Jack. They had also amassed a tremendous amount of XP, leaving them with unexpected free time after reaching that point. Second finally decided to make a move, figuring that this would be a good opportunity. As they continued gathering, he explained that since they had such a rare opportunity, they should learn everything they could. They all turned their attention toward him. Recalling what he had said, Second meant that they should learn the promoted bishop and promoted rook skills for the main skills they currently possessed, regardless of whether they could actually make use of them. For Sylvia, that meant promoted bishop archery and promoted rook archery. For Iko, it meant promoted bishop shieldsmanship and promoted rook shieldsmanship. For Second himself, it meant not only promoted bishop archery and promoted rook archery, but also promoted bishop swordsmanship and promoted rook swordsmanship. Acquiring those skills one by one only after they actually needed them would be troublesome. Since they had this opportunity, the plan was to learn whichever skills they could for now and advance them to the 16th class. Promoted rook swordsmanship, in particular, had practical uses, so Second intended to improve it once he acquired it. Sylvia wanted to know exactly how they would acquire the skills. Second realized that those were the only 2 skills Sylvia had yet to acquire for Archer, which explained her enthusiasm. He decided to begin by explaining promoted bishop archery. In simple terms, they only needed to defeat a dragon. Sylvia froze at the explanation and struggled to process the fact that a dragon was involved. Second clarified that the important part was how they defeated it. For promoted bishop archery, the final attack had to be performed with bishop archery. Until that point, however, they needed to use all 7 different kinds of skills ranging from pawn archery to castle archery, attacking the dragon with each one at least once. Sylvia went pale. Yukari questioned whether such ineffective attacks could really be used in a battle against a dragon. Second assured her that they could. As long as they knew how to tackle it, defeating the dragon would be a piece of cake. Besides, that alone was not enough to acquire promoted bishop archery. Sylvia was shocked to learn that there was more. Second explained that if they repeated the sequence he had just described on 5 different dragons, they would be able to learn the skill. Sylvia became livid. Iko found the condition difficult and Yukari agreed. Second himself acknowledged that it certainly sounded like a pain. There was more than one kind of dragon in Mabayon, with at least 20 different kinds from top to bottom. He believed they could fulfill the condition by finding 5 of them, starting with the weakest. Considering everything, he could not imagine anything more troublesome. Promoted rook archery, by comparison, should be somewhat easier to obtain. Second explained that they simply needed to defeat any 10 dragons using only castle archery. Even so, he considered that method much simpler. Sylvia reacted violently, insisting that there was no way such a condition could be considered simple. To her, it was a dream within a dream, and she felt as though she might pass out. Second explained that swordsmanship had the same conditions, meaning he would be hunting dragons alongside Sylvia. Since he would be helping her, everything would definitely be fine, and she had no reason to worry. Sylvia caught a glimpse of hope and questioned whether he was serious. Even so, she remained suspicious that despite Second's reassurance, he was simply trying to throw her into a dragon's den. Second wondered who exactly Sylvia thought he was. Iko's eyes sparkled as she wondered about her own conditions. Second explained that Iko's case was a little special. For promoted bishop shieldsmanship, a dragon simply needed to be defeated by a team member after it had come into contact with at least one of each skill ranging from pawn to castle shieldsmanship. This had to be done with 5 different kinds of dragons. As for promoted rook shieldsmanship, Iko needed to parry 100 hits in a row against a dragon using castle shieldsmanship. It was somewhat difficult, but Second would explain how to do it. Iko understood and resolved to do her best. Second encouraged her to do exactly that. While they were away hunting dragons, Second asked Yukari whether he could count on her to handle everything with the Earl. Yukari assured him that she would take care of everything and that he could leave it all to her. Second accepted this and decided that they would commence the operation. With that, their adventure at Proline smoothly came to an end. They headed north from Bad Cold, advancing toward a ravine. Iko wondered where the dragon was. Second explained that there were swarms of them at Medio Dungeon. The second-ranked dungeon, Medio, was actually an outdoor dungeon. It resembled a ravine, and 7 kinds of dragons appeared there, including the boss. In other words, it was a dragon's den. Sylvia immediately realized that Second had meant Medio. She knew that it had not yet been conquered. Second knew that Medio Dungeon was the second hardest dungeon after all. Since Proline had not yet been conquered, he figured that Medio had not been either. Sylvia became concerned that they were heading to such a dangerous place to take down dragons. Second assured her that there would be no issue. Not too many monsters appeared at Medio, allowing the 3 of them to constantly fight each one off as a trio. However, in exchange for the low number of monsters, only dragons appeared there. It was a matter of quality over quantity, and each and every one of them was considerably powerful. Second assured Sylvia that she would not die. Sylvia accepted the reassurance. The 3 of them stood before Medio Dungeon. Second energetically announced that he had found one. Iko noted how huge it was, while Sylvia realized that they were really going to fight that dragon. Second decided to demonstrate first and instructed them to watch carefully.